I'll read the proclamation.
Good morning, but I also have two survivors from Pearl Harbor.
Great.
So Jean Gouvernement and Joe Brook. Would you please come up?
While they're coming up, I'll read the proclamation. Whereas on the morning of December 7th, 1941, America was attacked without warning at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air and naval forces of Imperial Japan. And more than 2,400 people lost their lives, and another 1,100 were wounded, triggering our entry into World War II. And whereas on December 7th, we honor those killed 66 years ago and those who survived to fight on other fronts in the 4 succeeding years of World War II. We also remember the millions of brave Americans who answered our country's call to battlefields, to the factories, and to the farms. Whereas the attack at Pearl Harbor fired the American spirit with a determination that freedom would not fall to tyranny. And the United States and its allies fought to victory, preserving a world in which democracy could grow. We remember the sacrifice of the heroes of Pearl Harbor and all of the men and women of the greatest of generations who defended tyranny, who defeated tyranny. And whereas the Veterans Council of Indian River County will be holding a special ceremony in observance of Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day at the Veterans Memorial Island Sanctuary on December 7, 2006 at 1 p.m. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that December 7, 2006 be designated as Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day in Indian River County. And the board urges all residents to fly the American flag at half-staff in honor of those who died as a result of their services at Pearl Harbor, and to urge all residents of Indian River County to attend the ceremonies at Veterans Memorial Island Sanctuary December 7th, 2006. Adopted this 5th day of December 2006. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. On behalf of the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, I want to thank the council and also say that a few of their members will not be here for this ceremony because they're in Pearl Harbor celebrating the 65th anniversary of the surprise attack. And we have Eugene Gouvernement and Joe Brook. That's too easy to remember, that's why I forget. And they both were at Pearl during the attack. We do have a beautiful ceremony, and the ceremony, instead of just being a cold military type of a ceremony, there'll be something in it for everyone. We have poems as well as essays, and the poems and the essays deal with that moment. It takes you back to a period of time when this country was relatively young, which was only 65 years ago, but what a difference between then and now. We didn't have the computers, we didn't have TV. If you were lucky enough to have a radio, well, so be it. A dress was only $1. Gasoline was probably about 8 cents a gallon, if you can get it. Tires, forget about it. Nobody had a car, and there wasn't a chicken in every pot, as FDR had promised. So this was a period of time that hopefully our ceremony will take you back. And another thing, that since this county has been wonderful to our veterans, we would like to give each one of you the symbol of happiness and good luck and also good health, which is the Hawaiian lei. And so I have one for each one of you, and hopefully I have one for Joe and Kim as well. So just take one.
No, I was just taking one.
He needs double health and welfare.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And these are excellent because they're made in China. So thank you, Dan.
Congratulations on the
Thank you, Peter.
Appreciate it.
Larry.
Get that. Oh, where's Joe? Come on, Joe. We got to give Joe Monterano, who is
Your photographer.
yes. Thank you so
While
much.
we're standing, I'd like to applaud these gentlemen for their service.
Joe's taking more pictures.
There were just one more pictures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry. The next item is approval of the minutes, the regular meeting of September 19th, 2006.
Move approval.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye? Aye. Next is regular meetings of October 3rd,
Move
2006.
approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And regular meeting of October 10th, 2006
Move approval.
minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
The consent agenda. Anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda?
R, S,
Pardon?
R and S.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like G and M as in Mary.
Okay, G and M. Okay, anybody else?
Move approval as amended. Oh, you want
I was going to pull G and R. So anyway, they're pulled by
They're pulled.
Peter. Okay, got it. Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the rest of the consent agenda. Any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Let's see, we'll go with Joe first. You want to R, Joe?
I'd like a better explanation for the extension, the request from the developer, Centex Homes. I believe some of the explanation was market conditions and workforce, as well as Hurricane Wilma. And I don't believe that Hurricane Wilma had that much of an impact on our county. I believe the school children were able to return back to school the next day, and life as we know it continued on. I don't believe that that would be a prudent explanation why we would need a delay or an extension, as well as market conditions which were more or less that constant throughout the entire year. So I'd like to know if we have a bit more of an explanation on why we're looking for this.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Joseph Schulke, Bill and Stoddard, Vero Beach, Florida. I'm the civil engineer for Centex Homes and the Vero Lago project. And one other factor we can look at is really just the size of this project. It's a 180-acre project, and any staff that's here or maybe the commissioners know that you'll see a lot of projects that can't get completed, a 48-acre project in 1 year, and it's 180 acres. We're on the very edge of it being done. It's all been paved. The first phase is complete, and this was all done concurrently, all 5 phases. First phase is complete and it's got a CC. Second, third, fourth, and fifth phases all have their first lift of asphalt, so we're that close. All the improvements are done. They're working on landscaping. They're bringing a little bit of fill in the 5th phase. But everything's been paved, all the utilities are in. So really it's just some minor brush-up items. And I haven't seen a project go as fast as this one ever since I've been doing civil engineering here, 180 acres in 1 year time frame. So that's probably another factor that was left off the letter. It was just a very big project to get done in a year. We're almost there, and we just need a little bit more time. And also I'd like to add that the houses that you do see in there are in phase 1, and that phase is CC'd, so it's not an issue of people waiting for the subdivision to get complete to be able to move into their house.
Joe, any comments from anybody else?
I just said, while you're up there, I had similar concerns about the Woodfield PD. You're asking for a request for that for the same reasons.
Yeah, I would have to let, I'm not the engineer on the Woodfield one, but Centex is here, and I'll let them address
Leave
that.
that separate.
Okay, let's handle, if we're going to handle them separately, we'll dispose of Joe's first, which is R, I think,
Yes.
Joe? And the only thing I would state is that, our ordinance says for good cause, and I don't think it's good cause, and I would support taking the letter of credit. That's my position anyway, but at any rate, any other comments from anyone?
Does Centex have anything to say for yourself?
Excuse me, my name is Nelson Bennett, Centex Homes. Like Joe said, we're right at the very end, trying to do punch-out work right now and get ready for the paperwork for the certification. So we would just ask your agreeing to allow us to wrap this up. And we'll give you our word that we'll get it done as quick as we possibly can.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I've got a question of legal on this. Mr. Collins, we pulled the letter of credit. Who's responsible for doing the work? The county would be responsible for going out to bid to finish the remaining work and overseeing the completion of the work.
And perhaps something that would make a little bit of sense here, if we could, maybe extend the letter of credit but not issue any more building permits till it's done.
Well, I see we're still advertising to sell in that subdivision. I received one of the mailers yesterday.
That's correct.
So perhaps that could be a stipulation that we can cease the building permits until we catch up, if we would to choose to extend.
Can that be broken into the separate phases?
Well,
There's 4 phases out there.
5.
We're literally
Yeah, there's
that
4.
close to being complete with the punch out, where it's just a matter of paperwork and the timing just cut us off right at the end here.
Typically, for each of the 4 phases that are incomplete, they can't get a certificate of occupancy for any building within those phases until the work is complete, all the work is complete with that phase. I'm not sure that not issuing a building permit gives you any better control than...
Well, they could have a home built. I mean, if we extend this credit, they could quite possibly have a home built and be in the situation where we're waiting on them. And if they're truly as close as they're talking about, this shouldn't be an issue. Let them go ahead and finish up the paperwork, and then they can
Is it just
move forward.
paperwork, or is it's really some work that has to be done?
how much more physical work do you have there?
We've got the final lift of asphalt down. We're doing, minor punch out, hydrant pads and stuff like that. We're doing perimeter berm, irrigation and landscaping, which will probably take us another 60, 75 days. And then concurrent with that, we'll be running through all the certification paperwork through the county and trying to obtain our CC on the entire remainder of the project.
They're asking until June 5th to complete all work in all phases.
And I made that, my name's Richard Reese with Syntax Homes. I made that request just because you never know what happens. 6 months just seemed like, a year, 6 months. I think we'll be done faster than that.
Staff has always allowed this to happen. I think it would help if we maybe allowed them to finish and we could communicate with other developers that we're not going to, normally we have extended the letter of credit without a problem, and we've been communicating with developers regarding that. So I think it may help if we had some lead times, as we could communicate that we won't be extending letters of credit. It creates a problem for the developer too on an overall picture. Maybe shorten the time frame here. Don't give them till June. Give them till April, and put everyone on notice that we're going to expect.
I think by denying this request, we are putting people on notice that we're going to hold their feet to the fire on these letters of credit.
I believe that we would have the work complete. If you pull the letter of credit, we'd still have the work complete before you'd be able to pull letter of credit, go through the process of bidding it out. We could handle it faster.
Mr. Chairman, and it's based on that, and not only that, based on those comments, I really think the prudent thing would do is, if there's a way for our attorney to feel comfortable with it, is to not issue building permits until this is done, and have and then we start moving forward on the 7th or in June. Forget the specific date.
So the motion would be to...
Well, there's a motion on the floor right now, if I'm not mistaken, right?
No, I don't think anybody's made a motion
Joe,
yet.
you didn't make a motion?
No,
Okay, all right. Well, Commissioners, I move that we extend the letter of credit to the time that they're asking, but not issue any building permits until they get finished with the work.
Well, let me backtrack on that for a minute. Did I just hear you say that if we pulled the letter of credit, that you'd have all this work done anyway before we could...
No, if we pull the letter of credit, the county would be responsible for
I
completing
get
the
that,
work.
but I was wondering what you said exactly.
The infrastructure is complete. I mean, the water, sewer, drainage is in, the roads are in and paved.
So you don't really need 6 months? Oh, why did you ask for 6? What do you need?
We probably could be finished in 90 days. And the reason I say that is just because of the extent of the perimeter berm and landscaping that we're working on now. We're going to try and run the certification paperwork concurrent with that, so that as soon as we finish the landscaping, we're calling in for the final inspections. We're going to work with the county engineering and utility departments to wrap everything up before then, so that once we get the landscaping in, that's the last item remaining.
I think we have to look at the end result here. We have to finish the subdivision just like they do if we take it over. I think we're trying to send a message that, and we could send a message that we don't, but we're going to have to finish it just like they will if they have their letter of credit, so we have to go out to bid and everything. We will have to complete the subdivision just like, that's why we have this form of security, and I think they're making an effort.
We have no interest in abandoning what we're doing and stopping the progress that we've already made. We have every intention of finishing and trying to get that wrapped up as soon as we possibly can.
Wesley's motion dies for lack of a second. And anybody else?
Well, I'd move that we extend the letter of credit for 4 months.
Well, they said they only needed 90 days.
If you want to do an
30 days.
extension, I'd prefer to see 90 days.
Yeah.
That's what the man
rather
asked
than-
for.
And then my motion for extend it for 3 months then.
We have a motion?
Second.
Oh, okay. Under discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just think that, like Mr. Baird said, that as far as people coming back in here and extending the line of credit all the time, I think it'd be sending the right message for us not to allow any more building permits till they get done what they're supposed to get done. But I just wanted to express my minority opinion one more time.
You don't know that it's a minority yet. Yeah, I'll tell you, the problem I have is 2 years ago I tried to talk to Centex, and they didn't want to talk to me about their project out there, and they didn't want their engineer to talk to me about that. And that's a lack of cooperation. And so I don't feel any obligation to cooperate with them on this. And I also think that it's pretty standard that these letters of credit keep coming forward. In fact, the next one coming up, G, when that comes up, I think that expires in 3 days. So it's pretty much an assumed thing that all you got to do is apply and these things happen. And based on that, I'm going to vote against the motion. Any other comments? No. We'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, and the motion is to extend this 90 days, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Aye. 3 opposed, 3-2 is the way I read this?
Was it 3-2?
3-2.
Just have a show of hands.
Okay.
Favor of?
Who was opposed to the motion?
No.
Myself, Wesley, and Joe.
Okay.
So the motion fails, 3-2. We have another motion.
I'll make my motion again if I can get a second, but I don't want to beat a dead horse.
Well,
I move that we extend the letter of credit to the time that they've requested, but not issue any building permits until they get the work done.
we have a motion, do we have a second?
Oh, second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. So we're at a little stalemate
Thank
here.
you. Actually, the only one we haven't done yet, and we need to
The
go
motion
ahead
to deny the request.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll make that motion to deny request.
I'll second that.
Got some discussion.
Okay, under discussion.
Was it a question of if you held the building permits and you gave us the 6 months, or we would agree to holding our building permits and give us 90 days?
Both of those motions fail.
Failed, doesn't matter.
I was just clarifying to see if you
The
were asking
motion
for
on the
6
floor now
months.
is to deny the request to,
The only thing I have to add is that we could get this complete before, if the county took on the responsibility, instead of the county employees having to waste their time taking care of us. Please let us handle this, and we'll take care of it immediately.
okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0, I guess?
No, I opposed.
You're opposed. And that motion was to deny the request for the letter of credit.
For the extension of the
For the
contract.
extension.
Huh? For the extension.
Extension.
Extension of time
So-
to complete the improvement.
So we're now in the business of completing this
Yep.
within less than 90 days, Mr. Baird?
We don't know when, I'll have to come back with a time frame. We're going to have to find out how long, we're going to have to go out to bid and take over. It's going, the process is, we're going to have to do what they were going to have to do, so, and we're going to have to go through our bidding process, which will take longer. It's just, we're dealing with public money, so we have a set of rules when they're bidding, doing this, and we have to go and bid it and write, maybe, I don't know if there's if we're going to have to do engineering, we'll do it in-house. We're going to have to discuss this project and bring it back to you probably next week.
Okay. The next item is item S, Joe, on page,
And again, for the same reason?
the 213, I think that's a little different, Will?
Yeah, on this particular project, before their contract expired, they came to the board on September 5th, and the board did approve a request for a one-year extension subject to their engineer updating a cost certification. We received the updated cost certification of the remaining work on November 27th, and we're simply bringing those numbers back to you to ratify the modification of the contract that was extended September 5th. So in this case, you approved the extension subject to a cost certification, which we've now received, and we're bringing it back to plug in the final numbers on the modified cost.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Can we get a motion? There's no questions?
Whose item was this? Yes.
This was S, Ashley Lakes North Development.
I know, but whose item is it?
It was Joe's.
Do you have any questions?
No further questions.
Okay. You want to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Next is item G, which is Centex, again, similar item on page 27.
Yeah, I just had the same concerns that were brought up on the previous Centex home, that this is the one where the letter of credit expires, I think, in
3 days.
3 days. And my concern just was, again, coming back to extension and not getting the work done. And if everything's that close, why not just get it done and be over?
My understanding on this one is they have already extended the letter of credit in contemplation that the contract would be extended.
Okay. It's the same, basically the same thing. We get a motion for item G. I don't think, is there any discussion about that? Any questions? It's the same as item S was, please. Item R was.
This project is a little different in terms of the timeframe of where it is. Water and sewer for this entire project are certified and have been for some time. All the perimeter landscaping is in and has been accepted by the county. The only issue we have is the final CC inspection with the engineering department, and that is due to a couple of places that are we have water ponding, and we're meeting on site this afternoon to address that with the contractor to try and get that finished as quick as we can. But everything else in here is complete.
Okay.
And the extension is for how long, Will? Not
Till
sure.
June 5th, 2000.
Till June 5th.
Well, I'll try again with a motion to approve the extension for only a 3-month period.
We have a motion. No second. Motion dies. My position on this is the same as it was on the last one, for sake of conversation. Anybody want to try another motion?
I'll try mine. I'll try mine. It didn't go anywhere. That we extended to June 5th, but don't issue any building permits. I just think that it's foolish to waste staff time on it if we're so close. But at the same time, if they can't live up to their obligations, they shouldn't have the opportunity to pull more building permits and get distracted in any size, way, shape, or form.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Aye. Motion carries 4-1. Okay, your next item, Peter, is item M.
Yeah, on this one,
That's on page 78.
is Jim Davis here? Jim, my big concern on this one was looking at the summary of the bids, that this particular bidder had the very lowest bid price for erosion and water pollution control. And we've just recently had a county project where we've really stuffed that up. We've had a lot of problems with silt barriers and leaking ditches and all kinds of problems. And I just want to make sure that if this bidder's coming in spending the least amount of money on erosion and water pollution control, I want to make sure we don't hear one single ruffled feather from this project. And if you're confident that this bidder can do those things for that price, fine, but I'd urge you to watch him carefully, because we just need to lead by example on these projects, and we can't be having leaking silt fences and water discharges and stormwater runoff and all those problems on county-run projects. I just want to make sure that that's real clear on this project.
Yes, the way this particular bidder bid the project, looks to me like he put more into mobilization than in that particular bid item. And sometimes bidders do that for one reason or another. Sometimes they can get paid a little quicker by putting it in mobilization. But I feel confident that this is a small site up in Gifford, and the perimeter of the site is small. And I think they can do this for that amount. I just think they put most of their money in mobilization.
Okay, and if you're fine with that, that's good. I just want to bring it up for the record that we don't want any mistakes going forward.
I understand.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
In looking at this, just real quick, Jim, is this going to be on knowing the area around Gifford Middle School, it's up there, it's on the scrub area. Is this on, I'm not going to call it virgin land, but is it scrub oaks and such as that need to be cleared?
No, sir. This is on the already developed site of the Gifford Health Clinic.
All right. I just want to make sure that.
So this is just a little gazebo for the community coach bus stop area there, and some grading and paving for the bus shelter. But it's not clearing a scrub oak site or anything like that.
Okay. Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion?
Yes, second.
And a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Next is public items, public hearing. That's 9A1, Tax Equity Fiscal Responsibility Act, Palm Beach County Health Facility Authority Retirement Community Revenue Bonds, memorandum dated November 27th, 2006, found on pages 230 to 236. It's administrative in nature. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. You're being asked today to hold a public hearing to approve the issuance of bonds by the Palm Beach County Health Facilities Authority. This hearing is required under federal tax law because two of the facilities are located here in Indian River County. Once the Health Facilities Authority issues these bonds, the proceeds will be used to refinance the existing debt and to perform renovations, including hurricane hardening, on 5 facilities. 2 facilities are located here in the county, and approximately $7.2 million, or 30% of the bond proceeds, will be spent in this county. We're asking you today to hold the public hearing and take public comment, close the public hearing, and approve signing the Second Amendment to the interlocal and the resolution and any other documents that may be required.
Have any questions of staff? I'd just like to point out that this also doesn't, and it says in here, it doesn't obligate us, but the objective of this is they get the advantage of
Tax-exempt debt.
insurance. Yeah.
Yes, this is not an obligation of Indian River County in any way. Our credit is not pledged. This is just pass-through conduit financing to make the debt tax-exempt for the owner of the facilities.
Thank you. We'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the audience want to be heard on this? If not, we'll close the public hearing.
Move to approve staff recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries. Next item is to amend Chapter 207, Licensing and License Taxes for Indian River County Code, memorandum dated November 27, 2006, found on pages 237 through 245.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a public hearing to amend Chapter 207 of the Indian River County Code. Since the 1970s, Florida counties have had the ability to impose a business tax. However, it was called an occupational license. After the 2004 hurricanes, the Florida legislature decided that there was too much confusion and opportunity for fraud and misrepresentation, and has changed the governing statutes to call the item, instead of an occupational license, a local business tax, and to replace the term license with receipt. Here in Indian River County, we've had this flat $40 tax since approximately the early 90s. There's no change in the amount of the tax. It's merely a clarification, and the ordinance, if approved, will be effective January 1.
Okay. Any questions of staff? If not, we'll open the public hearing. Anyone in the public wish to be heard on this? If not, we'll close the public hearing.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
9.3 is a request for continuance of the public hearing regarding consideration of approval of proportionate fair share agreement and development agreement for Oslo 27th LLC, and approval of an amendment to the capital improvement element of the comprehensive plan to include the four-laning of 27th Avenue from 13th Street Southwest to 17th Street Southwest. Memorandum dated November 29th, 2006, and my understanding is the request to move this hearing to December 12th, time certain. Do we need to open, we don't need to open that, do we, if we just...
Mr. Chairman, this has been advertised as a public hearing. The purpose of it is to amend the comprehensive plan to add to the capital improvements element a segment of 27th Avenue between 13th Street Southwest to 17th Street Southwest. This is a process that was approved under Senate Bill 360 in cases where there were links that were found to be deficient but weren't on the county's 5-year plan. We've been working for a number of months with Mr. Swanson as the lead of a group of developers who's contemplating putting this improvement in as an entirely private project. However, in the last week or so, we've come to an impasse which we hope to work out in the next week over the impact fee credits that might be available to them for constructing this public road project. And because of that, we would ask that the hearing advertised for today be continued for 1 week to next Tuesday to give us an opportunity to work out some of these impact fee credit issues among the participating developers.
Okay. Do we need to open the public hearing, Will, or can we just make a motion
I think
on this?
you can, since it's been advertised. I think you can limit it if it gets astray, but it would be up to you.
Well, we don't need to open the public hearing if we just get a motion to move this to next week.
Unless there's someone that objects to it.
You object, Jerry, you want? Okay, well, any questions of staff from the commission? If not, we'll open the public hearing. Mr. Swanson?
Jerry Swanson, PNS Properties, 3001 Ocean Drive, Vero Beach. I'd just like to give the commission a little background on this. On September 13th, we had a meeting in Joe Baird's office, and we agreed to try and do a developer agreement that was good for the county and good for the development community at Oslo and 27th. As everyone knows, proportionate share went into effect north of Oslo on 27th Avenue, but there's a failing link, 2410, between 13th and 17th Street Southwest. Oslo 27th, which is our group, has a project at that intersection that has 44,400 square feet of to-be-built commercial. We had 10 trips that failed at that link, 2410. So we agreed to enter into a letter of credit for $5 million, which is $4,634,000 plus 15% contingency that was required by the county to enter into a $5 million letter of credit. It was agreed that our 10 trips, and actually, Kim, could you put that on the board, please? Put C on first, if you would. Yeah.
I got it.
evening.
I'm going to ask Rhonda Hessler, who's the financial guru with P&S Properties, and since this is his purview, I'd like to have him explain this to you so that you have a better understanding of what we're trying to do.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Rhonda Hessler. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for P&S Properties. This Exhibit C is a schedule I put together to try to make it easy to understand the economics involved in this particular transaction. The $4,356,000 is the estimated amount that Kimley Horn has given us to complete this 1/2 mile section of road. On top of that, we need to put up a 15% additional amount from that the county's requested us to, which gets us to the $5 million letter of credit. By expanding the road by from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, we generate an additional 198 trips. And if you take the total amount of the cost of construction for that link divided by the 198, less a proportionate share allocation, you come up with the $21,190.09. We need 10 trips. So our particular portion of this 1/2 mile link should, in theory, cost us $211,900. What we're asking the county to do is to give us a credit for that amount out of our traffic impact fees, or pardon me, transportation impact fees. Our transportation impact fees for our project, which is the 44,400 square feet, amounts to $489,000. So we will end up paying $211,000 or $212,000 towards the total cost of the road. Plus, we'll give the county an additional $277,000 to go toward other transportation impact fees throughout the county, wherever that's going to be allocated. In addition to that, we'll pay another $142,000 in other impact fees, which relate to solid waste and the schools and whatever else is involved in that thing. So we end up giving the county $420,000 toward impact fees, and we still have $212,000 that are allocatable to that particular link.
That's correct. And as Will Collins indicated earlier, we've been negotiating this with 6 or 7 drafts of the agreement and have agreed on everything until last Tuesday. We got the whole premise of this, in our opinion, was to not only allow us but other developers in the area that are affected by this link to participate and get the same credit on their impact fees that we did. And we got into an impasse, and so that's where we decided that we would take this off the staff decided to take it off the agenda to negotiate a little further. We had a meeting yesterday that hopefully we've been able to work things out, but what we're asking the commission, what we will be asking the commission is to give the other developers in that area that are affected by this link the same deal that Oslo 27th has, and that's basically 45% of their transportation impact fees. And I want to stress that we still pay the rest of our impact fees. Many of us will also have to pay our proportionate share to get vesting north of Oslo and 27th. And in our particular case, we're going to write a check to the county for $1,052,000 for a 44,400 square foot project. Plus, we're going to provide the county with a $5 million irrevocable letter of credit. And Joe Barrett asked yesterday if we had any more money left, and we said no, basically. But I don't want to make light of this. We think this is an excellent situation for the county. We've been trying to figure out ways to have the development community build roads that's fair to everyone. we think this is a fair agreement, and we would like every consideration for not only Oslo 27th, but for the rest of the developers in that area to have the same deal that we have. Any questions of me?
Any questions, Mr. Swanson? No? Thank you, Mr. Swanson. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this? Keep in mind that we are, I assume, based on this request, move this public hearing forward to next week.
I will, and I'll be brief. Joseph Paladin. I've read Mr. Swanson's developers agreement. I think it's out of all the many that I have read, I think it's very fair, and I think it's very much in the county's favor. And I would say that in going over this and trying to expedite this forward as fast as possible, we do want to get the roads built. And Mr. Swanson's company being able to come up with a $5 million letter of credit, plus writing a check to the county for $1 million, not every local developer here can afford to do that or has the wherewithal or the means to do that. So we need to take that into consideration when trying to work with Mr. Swanson and getting this done. And if there's any gray areas in the Senate Bill 360 or in the proportionate share, I can point out several other gray areas that we're going to have to adjust our LDRs to accommodate, or adjust our Senate Bill 360 the way we adopted it to accommodate, by the way we're paying our impact fees and the way we're moving them around. So I think we give anybody any consideration whatsoever, I'd like to see it done on this project so we can get going with the roads, get the roads started, and move it forward as fast as possible. So I support Mr. Swanson in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paladin. Anyone else wish to speak on this? Mark?
Mark Brackett, 1915 34th Avenue. I sat in a meeting about a year ago with County Administrator Baird, and slight elevation.
Yeah.
And
Don't do that to me.
And depending on the day, and many other department heads and a lot of the development community, both locally and regionally. And the message was clear. We need roads built, and we need your help. The administrator was asking for development help. How can you step up? We can't do it alone as a county. And so there were a lot of ideas bannered about, and it has kind of snaked its way around and turned into proportional share. And I think Jerry Swanson's done a good job of spearheading, if not the first agreement, the first one of substance that seems to be paving the way for future agreements. I've looked at the agreement. I think it's favorable to the county. I think it does give some credit back to developers for stepping up to the plate. But most of all, I think it addresses a roadway problem, and in this case, a roadway problem that affects not only specific developers, but the community as a whole. 27th Avenue, and that section of it is a section of road that almost everyone travels on a daily, if not a weekly basis. And I think it's long overdue we get it fixed, and this is a perfect example of cooperation between the county and the private sector. It's taking the resources that we have available and lifting the burden of personnel off the county. So I support the agreement, and I support agreements such as this moving forward in the future, because I think this is the linchpin to solving our traffic problem, whether it's real or perceived. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Johnson?
Bob Johnson, Corwin Subdivision. It would be interesting to know why the developer can't scale back his project so that he doesn't need the 10 trips and reduce the amount of traffic in that intersection in South County. And I'm not sure what the impact is on the South County initiative and how that impacts South County as it relates to the 27th Avenue intersection and also the 43rd Avenue. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion if someone would.
I have a
move
question
this.
first.
Yes.
of staff, do we have enough time by the December 12th to do all the paperwork we need to and come to this agreement?
We may or we may not. If the ordinance, if the proportionate share ordinance requires amendment, we do not. But I spoke to Mr. Keating yesterday, and he does not believe the ordinance requires amendment. We need to reconcile some portions of it that are seemingly in conflict, and we've got to get a reading on them that makes sense, reading everything together. If we can do that, we'll be able to come back next Tuesday with an agreement.
I'm not quite sure what you said.
Well, I think what we're
saying
the reason we're not doing something today is because we haven't come to an agreement. We think if we have a week, we may come to an agreement. If we don't, then the public hearing will just have to be put off further.
Conceptually, let me say this, conceptually, we are in agreement with Mr. Swanson on his agreement. We think it would be fair if everyone got the same, up to the same maximum credit, which we're discussing as 45% or 40%. And trying to protect the county, this is one of our first proportionate share agreements. We're going through it slowly to make sure neither of us make a mistake. It's been a little frustrating for Mr. Swanson. There's been some changes trying to make it fit our existing ordinances, and there are some conflicts, and we're working through that. We are attempting. We think it is a good agreement. We don't know. We don't also want everyone to think that they'll get all other developers will get the same impact fee credit or any impact fee credit. It depends on the project. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis. But do we conceptually agree with Mr. Swanson? We think it's the only way it'll work on this particular road. But we're looking at all our ordinance to make sure we don't have legal conflicts and problems down the road for the commission.
I appreciate that, Mr. Baird, but was really looking at the legal issues between what as I heard you say, what you believe and what Mr. Keating believes. I think you're our attorney.
Well, what we have is we've got a traffic impact fee ordinance that talks about giving credits, and it's very expansive. We give credits for improvements that are made that are on our 20-year plan. We have a proportionate share ordinance that seems to say you have to pay your proportionate share of your impact on the road and your impact fees, getting a much smaller impact fee credit. And what we're trying to do is reconcile those two ordinances so that they make some sense and they're fair to everybody. And we just need a couple days to sit down and work through that. It's not ready today. None of us feel, at least I don't feel comfortable recommending an agreement that would be acceptable to Mr. Swanson today, and he doesn't feel comfortable with the proposal that we put forward. The proposal that we had put forward has them getting reimbursed over a period of up to 10 years from other developers who would join in as they need capacity on this road. They'd pay their proportionate share. What Mr. Swanson is looking to do is to bring a consortium of developers right now who are willing to pay today and put the money into our funds and not having uncertainty about collecting or getting reimbursed going forward. He's trying to reduce his risk. We're trying to find a way to make it work for everybody so that we know the money's there up front rather than over a long period of time.
So if we can do this by the 12th, fine. If we can't, then we'll
back to
continue
the drawing
on.
boards.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? If not, we get a motion.
Make a motion to proceed and continue.
Okay.
Time certain, next
We have a
week.
motion, we have a second?
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries to next week. Next item, public hearing, is quasi judicial, and it's Mar Brothers LLC and First Atlantic Citrus Inc.'s request to rezone plus or minus 2.89 acres from CG to CH and CH to IG. Memorandum dated November 16th, 2006, found on pages 247 through 263.
Good morning. I'm Bob Keating. I'm County Community Development Director. This is a proposed rezoning, and this was advertised to be a rezoning from two zoning districts which currently are on the property now, and that's general commercial and heavy commercial, CG and CH, to IG, which is general industrial. At the end of your staff report, you'll see that we're not recommending approval of IG. We're actually recommending approval of IL, which is limited industrial, and I'll explain that as we go on. This property is located on just to the west. Well, actually, it's located just to the east of Old Dixie and a little bit south of 45th Street. It's a pretty small piece of property. It's just a little less than 3 acres in size. And as I said, it's currently split zoned. Part of the property is zoned general commercial, part is zoned heavy commercial, and our recommendation is to rezone it to light industrial. And the purpose of this rezoning is to allow the property to have zoning that accommodates industrial uses. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted 5-1 to recommend approval at its October 26th meeting, and actually the one voted against it because he would rather have IL, which we're now recommending. Let me orient you here. You can see the subject property, which is mostly CH and partly CG. There are 2 uses and 2 different pieces of property on here. There's a packing house on the CH part of the property, and packing houses are allowed in the heavy commercial zoning district. There's a boat manufacturing facility on the CG part of the property, and boat manufacturing is not allowed in the general commercial portion of the property. And as a matter of fact, that's why this is before you. This started out as a code enforcement action because the boat manufacturing was not allowed in the general commercial district. Now, when we first talked to the applicant about how his boat manufacturing actually worked, we categorized the use as falling in the rubber and plastics use category, and that use is allowed only in the general industrial zoning district. Since the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, when we've gone back, we've talked to the applicant more and determined that his boat manufacturing is more of a fiberglass type of operation. We have since categorized it in the stone, glass, and clay category, which is allowed in the light industrial zoning district. And generally, staff, the Planning and Zoning Commission, I think everyone would rather see light industrial uses than general industrial uses. So we got more information than what we had initially, and we've determined that a less intense zoning district would be appropriate here. And the IL district also allows packing houses just like the CH district. So in essence, this will work out. And you can see from the graphic on here, the surrounding uses are all either heavy commercial or general commercial uses. The railroad is on the west side of Old Dixie there. This is an area of the county between Old Dixie and US 1 with the railroad to the west that really can support a number of different zoning districts. It can be appropriate for a general commercial zoning district. It also can be appropriate for a light industrial district. And that's what we're looking at here, that the light industrial, the IL zoning district, accommodates the uses that are on the site, and it's consistent with the uses in the area. In analyzing this proposed rezoning, we looked at the criteria we always looked at. We looked at concurrency, comp plan consistency, environmental impact, and compatibility. I just went over compatibility to some degree, and this is exempt from the concurrency test because this will actually be a lessening of the intensity of the property, because actually the general commercial district would actually allow more intense uses than the light industrial district. So based on our regulations, that this rezoning is a lessening in intensity and it's exempt from concurrency. This rezoning is consistent with the comp plan. The entire area, the subject property and the properties completely surrounding it are in a commercial industrial node. So the land use designation on the land use map is commercial industrial, which supports either the CG or CH type of zoning or the IL, light industrial type of zoning. And it's consistent with all the policies of the comp plan. You can see from the aerial here, it's a pretty busy site. Not a lot of environmental resources on the property as it is. It's pretty much all developed, so there won't be any environmental impacts. And as I indicated, from a compatibility standpoint, the IL zoning district works and the CH zoning district works. The IL is more appropriate because it supports the uses that are there now, as well as uses which would be appropriate in the future. And as I said, really it's better to have the light industrial than the general industrial zoning classification. So in conclusion, staff feels that the proposed light industrial zoning district's compatible with surrounding uses, consistent with the comp plan. It's exempt from concurrency and there won't be any environmental impacts. So staff recommends that you approve rezoning the property from CG and CH to IL by adopting the ordinance that's attached to your staff report.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Any questions of staff?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Keating, what was the initial contact or the reason for the contact for code enforcement?
I think we got a complaint from someone, and I don't think it was necessarily a complaint based on impacts from the use. It may have been from a competitor or someone like that.
So it wasn't an environmental concern with the residents?
No.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? If not, we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the public that would like to be heard on this?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christopher Marine. I'm one of the principals of Marbros, the company that owns the property. I own the property with my three brothers, and we bought it about a year ago. The purpose of the purchase was for my brother Bill, who owns this boat company, Redfish Boats, to put the company at the site. Now, we understood originally this was industrial property, and that's the premise that we operated on throughout the terms of negotiation and preparing the thing for a closing. The boat company that my brother had purchased had been based in Titusville, and he wanted to move it into Vero Beach because I guess he didn't like commuting or something. But that had been the plan, and within a couple of days of the closing, I made a routine inquiry to Stan just to verify that the zoning and the land use and everything was in the appropriate order. And then lo and behold, we discovered that it's not that zoning. It's partially general commercial and partially heavy commercial. Talked to Stan about it at the time because it seemed to make sense to do a rezoning, and he just didn't feel that comfortable with it at the time. At that point, we had to close. We couldn't pull out of the transaction. He closed in the boat company, and we had to move it in. The solution was either to move the company or maybe to move that element of the process off-site. And let me explain that to you because it's kind of interesting to know the nuances of it and what part of their operation actually trips the scale and puts them in violation. With the zoning now, they can store boats, repair boats, inventory boats, do sales and marketing. They can do boat assembly. They can bring it in there and put it together. The only thing they can't do, the thing that constitutes manufacturing, is spraying some gel coat into a boat mold, which happens at that site probably an hour a week or less. So the plan was to try to move that element of it off-site or to move the company, and it's been very difficult to find somewhere we could do the other element of it, and the matter had just been put on hold for that period of time until we could figure out what to do. We don't know who complained. The neighbor to the north is actually before you today, too, for rezoning. The neighbor to the east is the Benacks, whom I know very well, my brother knows very well. They're okay with it. The neighbors to the south, there's a couple of homes. We've spoken with them. We've never heard any complaints from anyone or had any incidents whatsoever, so it came as a surprise to us. We're not sure what the circumstances were that gave rise to the complaint. But when that process began with code enforcement, there was some recognition by staff that it made sense to have the industrial zoning that we thought we had in the first place. And hence, we're before you today. I'll answer any questions. My brother's here on behalf of Redfish if you have any questions. But that's essentially the facts.
Anyone have any questions, Mr. Marine?
Just to clarify, so then the fiberglass molds are manufactured somewhere else, and you bring those to your site and just apply the gel coat, is that correct?
Yes, the boats that they build, they essentially build 3 models, but the one they build the most is an 18-foot flats boat, which is a fishing boat for shallow water. And they have a mold that they purchased, and as I understand the process, they spray this gel coat into the mold. They do that probably an hour a week or less, and that's the thing that makes the company non-compliant. Everything else it does at the site is fine. And Stan and I have kind of picked this thing apart to see. I think Stan, fortunately, he's here, and he can correct me if I'm wrong or certainly confirm what I'm saying. But that's the issue, and that's where it happens at the site.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Marine? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience like to be heard on this matter? This is a public hearing. If not, public hearing is closed.
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. The next item, 985, is consideration of proposed amendment to LDR Chapter 910, Concurrency Management System, Title X, Impact Fees, and Chapter 912, Single Family Development Memorandum dated November 21st, 2006, found on pages 264 through 366, legislative in nature. And I would request from the fellow commissioners and also ask consideration of a motion, because I can't make one. I would like to see us move this public hearing to January 23rd, which gives us some time to work on this, confer with staff, but also, along with that motion, I'd like to ask that we have a public workshop on January 11th. This is a very complicated and far-reaching ordinance that we're working on, and I spent a lot of time this weekend. I've been at many meetings on it. I still have questions, and I think it'd be, my position is it'd be advisable to have a workshop and also have more public input on this at the workshop. And the advantage of that is we can look at it, we can go through it, critique it, whatever we want to do, and we won't be allowed to vote on it at a workshop, which gives you a little time to digest all that before the 23rd of January. But that's my request.
January the 11th is what day of the week?
That's a Thursday. And the workshop's flexible. These are just dates I picked because it worked for me, and of course, I'm flexible on the dates. These are suggestions.
I like that recommendation, and that is recommendation C, part of it, on page 273 of staff's recommendation. So I move that. And January 11th at this moment sounds good to me, but I'll have to check my calendar.
Okay. That would be the workshop, but the time certain would be January 23rd. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'm fine with that, although I just asked if, do we need to open the public hearing in case someone is here that came to speak on this and let them comment and we continue it, or?
I think that because it's been an advertised public hearing, notice has been given, there may be some people that are here that would like to speak to it that may not be able to come to a later hearing or workshop. If that's the case, you should open the public hearing and see if there's anyone that needs to speak today rather than at the workshop or the postponed public hearing.
let me ask you this, Will. Would it be appropriate to have the question called and vote and then open the public hearing so everybody knows that we are going to move this if that's the case? and to let everybody know that we don't need to spend an hour and a half on something we're going to have another public hearing on?
I certainly think you can do that, but I also think that if someone can't make that public hearing, they should have an opportunity to make a record here today, despite the fact that you won't take any action today.
Right, and I agree with that. It'd just be nice if the people in the public that want to speak on this would know that it's going to be moved forward at any rate, and that way, if it's not someone that can't be here, they certainly have the option to say, well, I'll say what I've got to say later. So that being the case, we had a motion and we had a second. I think you seconded it, Peter?
No, but I will. I'll second it. And I'll...
Okay. So, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries. We'll open the public hearing. Going the wrong way, Bob.
You made it very clear, Gary.
Is there anyone that would like to speak on this? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Next item is under public discussion, and we have a request to speak from Joseph Paladin, Chairman of the Growth Awareness Committee, regarding proposed county right-of-way acquisition. Mr. Paladin?
Good afternoon and good morning. Joseph Paladin, Chairman of the Growth Awareness Committee. Actually, this is something that we tried to bring forward maybe about a year and a half ago to try and establish an outline of a policy of what we would use to acquire right-of-ways and speed up the acquisition of right-of-ways and make it fair for everybody by everybody knowing what the process was ahead of time. Now, we're not asking for a vote here today on this or any kind of action. I'm asking that you hear what the recommendations are and that you recommend to staff that we adapt this or adopt this as soon as possible, and that we make this a policy that the people that are negotiating for right-of-way and acquiring right-of-ways can hang their hat on, instead of it going one way or the other depending on who it is and who we're negotiating with. So with that being said, I'd like to read what the recommendations are, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. Okay, the first bullet point would be affected landowners would be contacted within 30 days of receipt of 60% plans or within 30 days of receipt of a sketch and legal description of the property necessary to be acquired. Second bullet point, negotiations. Negotiations will remain open for 120 days after the notification to complete a voluntary purchase. Third bullet point, following the expiration of the 120-day period or termination of negotiations, whichever occurs first, the file would be assigned to one of the eminent domain firms on contract for drafting a resolution of necessity for approval by the Board of County Commissioners. So that would have to come to you. At the same time, and the next bullet point, at the same time, an appraisal would be ordered for the affected property in order to comply with the statutory requirement. The next bullet point would be, following the completion of the appraisal and the approval of the resolution of necessity, a good faith offer would be made to the property owner. Next bullet point, if the offer supported by the appraisal is not accepted, suit would be filed for a quick take. Next bullet point, all subdivisions would be required to donate the minimum right-of-way, and the county would purchase the ultimate right-of-way on collector roads and thoroughfares. And the last bullet point, the purchase price for any excess right-of-way would be based on developer's purchase price of the bare land property. And under our current 952 we just adopted a couple of months ago, that's already in 952. So this there's nothing in here really that goes against what we've already adopted. It just sets out a policy that would be a guideline so it could expedite things and everybody know exactly where we're going and where we're coming from. Kind of like what you did earlier, Mr. Chairman, letting the developers know that you're not going to just give up and extend letters of credit automatically. So that's what I would like to present, and I would like the county commission to give staff some direction, or us some direction that we could go forward with this.
Joe, where are we on? We talked about this earlier too, this approach. Where are we on this exactly as far as our acquisition of right-of-way goes?
Well, this would just be changing, this is changing our existing policy. I don't know, I think Will's got a few comments that concern him, don't you, Will? We discussed it in staff regarding the time frame. We don't have a problem moving this forward. It's something we've talked about for over a year. We need to be more aggressive if we're going to get roads done in a more timely fashion. This will help a lot, because right-of-way holds up most of our road projects.
So your recommendation would be to move this in that direction?
Yes.
Will, did you want to comment?
Well, I think some of this is being done already. I know that it's suggesting that once you reach 60% of design, you contact the affected property owners. I know that the public works staff contacts property owners well in advance of 60% design. In fact, in advance of 30% design in most cases. In fact, on the 43rd Avenue project, Dr. Scaponato has been asking us for over a year and a half for the 60% design, and we haven't got there yet. As far as if the offer is supported by the appraisal, it's not accepted, file suit. Very often, you might want to make an offer in excess of the appraisal, because if you do go to court, you're going to have to pay not only your appraisals, but the opposing appraisals, the opposing attorney's fees, the opposing appraisal fees. So in some cases, you don't necessarily want to file suit just because the appraised value isn't accepted if you can negotiate some cost that is less than the cost of litigation. And the last bullet talks about the purchase price being the developer's price of bare land. Well, we can't force that. They're entitled, the owner's entitled to what they think is just compensation. We always try and get vacant land prices if that's what we're going after, but if the seller's not agreeable, it's up to a court and a jury to determine what the price would be. Those are the only comments I have.
What I'm hearing is that staff is in favor of moving forward on this. Is there anyone that objects? Okay, Wesley?
Just to comment on what he said at the very end as far as the just compensation. I'd just like to make it, if we could, a policy very similar to the last comprehensive land use change that we did. There's no need in doing an upzoning of a piece of property and then purchasing right-of-way at that time for a subdivision. To me, that defies logic.
I agree.
And so, Mr. Collins, I don't know how we can accomplish that, but there ought to be a way of us getting to that soon.
Mr. Chairman, I think under that LDR that we already put forth in 952, I think the correct wording is that the appraisal would be based on no finished development on the land. So it doesn't say on bare land, but that's the exact wording. So this should be worded to coincide with 952, but I'm perfectly happy with the wording that we took forth in 952.
Well, but you're not looking at just bare land. You're looking at if someone comes in and rezones from agricultural RM8, even though they haven't done anything, it's still raised the value of the property. But I think if we're in an area where we need those roads, then we should consider that at that time.
Yeah. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I meant.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? If not, thank you, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, sir.
And the next item is a request to speak from Maria, and I may mispronounce your name, Terranova, if you come forward, and that is regarding denial of an impact fee increase exemption found on page 370. You can just give them all to Wesley, he'll pass it on.
I'll leave off my germs down there.
Yes, ma'am.
In June of '05, when I heard about the increase in the impact fees, when I called the building department, Lee told me that I just had to fill out a construction contract affidavit for the exemption before July 1st. I had to have it in, which I did. This is what I gave you. Okay. I filled out the applications, and she said, all you need to bring in is a signed purchase contract and a copy of the canceled check for deposit, which I did. When I brought it in on the 21st of June '05, I handed it to Dawn on the second floor, and I said, do you have any idea how long this will take? She said, no telling, because there were hundreds of applications for exemption. I said, okay, I just figured it's going to take a long time. I was never notified that it was denied. I just found out this year. I started calling the beginning of June, and I spoke to, since the beginning, I spoke to Alan, Lee, Shannon, Dawn, Sandy, who finally put me in touch with the assistant county attorney, and he said he would investigate. Well, him and I were going back and forth, and he finally said it was denied. Up until that point this year, October, I still didn't know if it was denied. And I asked him why. I gave them what they needed. And he couldn't give me an answer, and that's why I'm here.
Bob, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, let me go back to the beginning, and Will can weigh in. He may need to help me with this. The county adopted new impact fees in May of 2005, and we went from having one impact fee, which is a transportation impact fee, to 9 different impact fees. So impact fees increased substantially. At the meeting on May 17th, when the board adopted the impact fees, the board made them effective on July 1st. Now, at that meeting, an issue came up. There was reference to a judge's determination in, I think, a Lee County case, the Lee County adopting impact fees, and the judge ruled that if anyone had a contract for construction and the impact fee increase was going to impair that contract, which would mean that, in essence, both parties would be hurt, then that would be unconstitutional. That was brought up at the final hearing, so the board determined that anyone who had a valid contract for construction prior to July 1st could submit that contract, and if that contract would be impaired by the new impact fees, then the person would be able to pay the old impact fees. So that was the process that was in effect. During that time, we received 820 contracts. And what happened is we logged every one of those in, and we have Ms. Terranova's logged in, and her builder, this is a mobile home, a proposed mobile home in the city of Fellsmere. And as you know, we do impact fees countywide. Her application was logged in. We have a copy of her application, her application and her contract. And the procedure we're using is we, up in community development, would log in the application. We would send it down to the attorney's office. The attorney's office would review the contract and determine whether or not the contract would be impaired by the impact fees, and then determine whether it was approved or not approved. And then the attorney's office would send it back up to us upstairs. We would call the applicant, and the applicant would come in and pick up the completed application that showed whether it was approved or not. As I said, we got 820 of these, and we've got them all logged in. What we don't have in the log is a specific indication of when Mrs. Terranova was called. So I can't tell you exactly when she was called. We didn't have that. My staff is sure we called every applicant. And the completed application form showing that the attorney's office denied it was picked up. We assumed maybe her builder picked it up while he was here to do something else. But I can tell you, at this point, where we are at is that the attorney's office determined that the contract was not impaired by the impact fees because the contract specifically said that the buyer would pay all impact fees. So therefore, there wasn't an impairment, and that was the decision of the county attorney's office. And essentially, that's where we are now.
Okay. Will, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think everything Bob said is accurate. The ordinance was adopted in May of '05. It didn't become effective until July of '05, and it had provisions that would exempt contracts executed prior to that July date that were submitted and showed that there would be an impairment, meaning that the parties hadn't anticipated these additional impact fee costs, and one or the other would have to bear them in an unanticipated manner. The application was submitted July 21st, and on it, it has a note with an asterisk, owner agrees to pay all impact fees. Based on that, we determined that there was no impairment of the contract because the contract specifically assigned to the owner the obligation to pay the impact fees, and the application was denied. I think later in December, the Commission amended that ordinance to delete the requirement of impairment of obligation of contract. I think, I can't remember the rationale, but I think there were a lot of people complaining that they didn't know what language to put in their contract, they were being unfairly hurt, and for whatever reason, the board did agree to delete the requirement that the contract must be impaired, but that exemption expired June 30th of this year, and here we are today.
Well, let me say this, Bob left one thing out. Staff does not have the authority to act on returning impact fees, and that's why it has to come to the board. There are several people in this lady's predicament, and in the past, the Commission has refunded their money. We do not have the ability as staff, so you have to make that decision the way the ordinance is written.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Wesley.
I'm ready for a motion unless you have more comments.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the impact fee increase exemption.
I'll second that.
And just based on the fact that...
Which means you'll get the old impact fee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, when we changed the rules in the middle of the game, and clearly she met the requirements, and where the cross-up was, it's counterproductive to point fingers, but let's move forward.
Thank you.
I think going back, from my take on that anyway, when we're going through all that, it was kind of a technicality that caught people in the middle that we tried to straighten out. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We need to vote.
Need to vote on this?
Yeah. We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. I think we'll take our break 6 minutes early and then come back and go into this, and we have to do that for the captioning on television, so take a 10-minute break.
Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment. Your Indian River County Commission meeting is in a brief recess. Please stay tuned. The meeting will reconvene in just a moment.
Call the meeting back to order, and next item is item 10A, proposed legislative needs for 2007 memorandum dated November 28, 2006. Joe?
Yes, in front of you, we have a list of the proposed lobbyist needs that we feel that we should lobby the legislature for, and for the meeting with the legislators on, I think it's December 14th, isn't it? So I have a proposed list in front of you. We'd like input from the commission if they'd like anything deleted or added to this list, or anything changed.
Okay. Any comments from the commission?
Are you going over, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, I am.
Do you want us all to go, or can you handle it?
I guess it depends on who you talk to.
Can you get the job done?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but we'll try.
Okay.
And Joe will be there, I'm sure. And of course, all of you are welcome to be there, and any support would be appreciated.
There's one I thought I didn't have, and one was water supply.
Yes.
I don't have water supply on this, and I may need it to change. I tried to think of everything that the commissioners have talked to me about. If there isn't, please let me know, and we'll be glad to add it.
Okay.
I think it'd be appropriate to add the water supply.
Yeah. And we'll know more about that after tomorrow.
And, of course, there's another issue under my matters, but we'll discuss that as we get to it.
Do you want to add it to this list?
Well, I'd like to make sure I got support of the commission before I add it.
Talk about the Scully?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's on here.
It's on here.
Do we need a dollar amount there, though, Commissioner?
Yeah, well, that dollar amount's coming from the athletic director from Florida Tech. He's got the plans, and it was in your backup, the plans. He's put a dollar figure to that.
Well, it's already on, so you'll be covered anyway. So.
Yes, sir.
All right, any other comments from the commissioners?
Excuse me, may I address the commission?
Yes. About this issue?
I think so.
Come to the podium, please, and give us your name and address.
My name is John Clinton. I live on Mockingbird Drive in Vero Beach. I wasn't planning on coming to the commission today, but I saw in the paper that, I believe this is the topic, about $101 million worth of requests from to the legislature. Is that the topic that you are addressing here? If
Yes.
so, okay. In that article, there was a comment about the Dodgertown property. And I come before you as a Florida citizen, and I think that it would be inappropriate to address the Dodgertown or ask for money to market the Dodgertown property in light of the fact that we have no control over that property at this point. And if you'd like me to explain, I will.
Yeah, because I'm not sure where you're coming from.
If you remember, the Dodgertown deal is a sale and leaseback transaction.
Correct.
Where the county bought the property for $10 million, effectively put $19 million into the property, and the Dodgers then had the right to lease it for 20 years at $1 a year. There were another aspect of the transaction, which was a repurchase option that the Dodgers have, that they can repurchase this property during the time of the lease or at the end of the lease, or basically any time they want. By having a repurchase or a lease with a repurchase option, the lessor, which is the county, virtually has no control over that property, meaning that the lessee controls the property for the use of the property through the lease and controls the future ownership of that property through the repurchase option. Okay? Until the county has control of that property, the Dodgers virtually have complete control of that property. Okay? Excuse me for being a little bit nervous here because I wasn't prepared to address you at this point.
We're all like that.
Well,
when we address Gary.
So, by the fact that the Dodgers virtually control that property through the lease of the use, through the repurchase option, the future ownership, until the ownership of that property is determined, I think it's inappropriate to go ask taxpayers, me, as a state taxpayer, to market that property, which the county may or not be able to control. The three options that the Dodgers have, as I understand the deal at this point, is to continue leasing that property for $1 a year for the next 15 years, seeing that 5 of them is already gone. They can repurchase that property, in which case they do what they want with that property and sell it to either another ball club or a developer, which is what is presumed to be happening now. The other option is to just walk away, in which case they pay liquidated damages. The numbers that have been talked about were that to pay liquidated damages is about $15 million. Okay, if the Dodgers just walked away, we as a county would get $15 million to pay off our debt. At that point, we would own the property free and clear and could do what we'd want, and we would have gotten a very good deal, being that we only put about $19 million into the property, and got all $15 million. Effectively, we bought that property for $4 million.
There's been some continuing negotiations over this, and I'll let Mr. Baird respond to this.
Let me just finish. If the Dodgers decide not to pay the liquidated damages and issue the first, they would have to if they're leaving, or they then repurchase the property through their repurchase agreement. That property is also said in some of the discussions be worth about $25 million, which means that the county would get their debt paid off of $15 million, pocket $10 million. The property would go back on the tax roll at the valuation of about $25 million, which means that the taxes on that property would then be probably $400,000 plus. Okay, the county would no longer have the requirements of maintaining it, managing it, or marketing it. That would go back to the original owner. Okay, so there's a lot of transaction or decisions to be made, on that piece of property. If the Dodgers are truly going to leave, and they really haven't decided, to my understanding, that they will, the deal in Arizona may fall through, in which case they continue leasing for $1 a year. If the deal in Arizona goes through, they can walk away from the deal, in which case we get that property free and clear, plus the cost that we incurred, the roughly about $4 million. Or they repurchase it. They repurchase it. We don't have any control on what they do if they decide to resell it, but we don't have control right now. So to ask the legislature to spend money marketing that property, I think it'd be inappropriate at this point.
Okay, let's have Mr. Baird respond.
Well, I'm going to have to give a little history, and it's going to take a little while on this item. When the Dodgers approached us, they were the only privately owned ball club in the nation, and they approached us to have the facility owned by the public, or they were leaving.
If I could interrupt, perhaps this would be better served if you and Mr. Clinton, because this is not really a part of the meeting, we're going to go over there and ask for certain things. There's no agenda on specifics, and perhaps if you two got together and spoke, and if it's something that needs to come back to this body, we can do that on another agenda.
Okay.
I'd be glad. My reason I'm here on such short notice was...
You saw the agenda.
I saw the agenda, or I saw that little article, and I think it's inappropriate for us to be asking for state money on something we don't control.
Two quick things. One is that you're right. They can buy it, and it can become the best real estate investment we've ever made if they have to buy it back. That's true, but the idea is that we're asking for an option right now because give us all our opportunities, maybe keep that rather than having it developed, and that's a decision. That's what we're trying to get worked in the contract right now, and they seem cooperative. On another issue that's been out there, this Board of County Commissioners, nor does Joe Baird, control the zoning in the city. The City of Vero Beach did the zoning, not this Board of County Commissioners or Joe Baird, which has been in the paper, which is inaccurate. The other thing is that I'd like to point out is we have this listed here, is that if the state's we're going to ask the state to allocate money to help bring teams to Florida or recruit teams. That's the purpose of this, is to discuss having an allocation, and you are correct.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton.
Okay, thank you.
Wesley,
That's exactly, this is a if-then kind of thing.
That's right.
This is if they leave, then, and it's basically just to get some legislation crafted and enacted well enough in advance that not just this community is prepared, but other communities in the state of Florida that may lose a spring training team.
And I don't think we need any action on this. Was information. Anybody wanted to add anything? And we did water supply, so we'll move on to the next item, which is 11C, General Services. No, I'm sorry. 11A1, which is to reconsider the DeVasta removal agreement, memorandum dated November 27, 2006, found on pages 273, 283, and Will explain this is informational and we don't need any action on this either. Will?
I thought you wanted a report from the Community Development Department on this.
I was going to let Will.
I was looking at the contract on this, where we don't have an option on the contract, as I understand it.
Correct. Well, we can terminate if we have to draw on their letter of credit, or their cash escrow rather, because they failed to remove a slab that's improperly poured and failed to replenish the escrow, but we haven't had that happen.
That's correct. There hasn't been a breach on their side of the contract.
Correct.
Okay. Does anybody need an update on this?
Looking back at this, the preferential treatment we're giving to one developer in the community,
Not good.
not good. Thank you. That's exactly right.
Well, going forward, we'll address that.
Yeah.
Okay. And next is departmental matters, C, which is General Services request for additional space from the clerk of the circuit court and the county health department. Found on pages 384 through 386.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Frame, General Services Director. By the way, somebody's left a cell phone up here.
How about that's, Mr. Swanson's.
Okay. We have, as the memorandum that we've included in the agenda package indicates, we've received requests from two parties, one being the clerk of the circuit court and the other one being Gene Klein, who's the administrator for the county health department, for additional space within the new administration building. Mrs. Klein's indicated that she could reasonably wait for some time after the building is completed. I wanted to go into the issue of the request by the clerk. As you know, at some point in the future, we're likely to have some additional judges in the courthouse, and a recent, well, I say recent, within the last 6 months, on two separate occasions in some discussions with Judge Kennerak, it was indicated that he anticipates that the need for an additional courtroom in the courthouse would occur sometime at that time, not less than 3 years, but not more than 5. We had a window in there, and the courthouse has an area that was originally planned for necessary courtroom expansion. Presently, that space is occupied by various occupants of the courthouse. The clerk's got some space in there. The public defender, and I believe the state's attorney's office, and also on the second floor, I believe some of that space is occupied by the sheriff's civil section. What I'm suggesting is that we not move at this point in time to put any additional occupants in the second building of our facility, really for two reasons. First of all, any additional work right now is going to create an additional delay on the completion of that building. Secondly, we have 23,000 square foot of future growth area in there, which the Board of County Commissioners wisely precipitated with the additional 10,000 square foot, plus with the removal of the EOC out to a freestanding facility that provided additional unoccupied space. So we've got approximately 23,000 square foot in that facility. However, if we're not careful in how we plan the use of that space by some quick action to put something into that area, we could end up really impacting the efficient and effective use of that space for the future. The other aspect is, I think we're going to have to look at, in the fair near future, what we're going to do relative to displacement of the occupants of the courthouse, and what we're going to have to do relative to providing the additional courtrooms. I think that what we ought to do is look at some type of planning to how we're going to deal with that, and whether or not it's appropriate to put them into this space that's found on the second floor of Building 2, and if that's deemed the right thing to do, then to properly plan that area so that we can effectively make sure that we don't squander some of that space through reacting too quickly. And basically, that was the reason I suggested we need to wait till at least we've got the building finished, and we can take a real good look and plan how we need to deal with those issues.
I would agree with that. Do we have any comments or motion?
I'd also like to bring up one comment here, because the sheriff talked to me at break. The sheriff has requested, and we're also looking at, he's short space, and he has requested, we're analyzing that also. And I need to also make you aware of that.
Okay. We got a motion on this recommendation. Any questions, any comments?
Well, I'd move we accept staff recommendations.
Second. Any discussion?
Well, this building is intolerable to the working conditions, and the sooner we get out of here, the better. So I think that we shouldn't delay moving at all.
Okay. Any other discussion? Not. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Chairman, may I make a statement? Very short, 60 seconds. All right?
My name is Richard J. Martin, 859 Island Club Square, and I would like to point out that the main subcomplex, which is right outside your door, was to be completed according to Turner's contract schedule, which is still in force at this time, 1 month ago.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
We need to correct that on the record. There's been several I know there's been several quotes on how much our building program was. We've seen 88 million, 100 million in the newspaper. All the buildings come to 54 million. That includes the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center, the Supervised Election Center on 43rd Avenue, and the 2 buildings next door. The paper keeps putting 100 or 88 million. I don't know where they get their numbers from.
You got their numbers from me, Mr. Beard.
Oh, that explains it.
Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin.
And I think we need to address that we're on schedule with the contract.
Let me make 2 comments. First of all, the subcomplex is not a Turner contract.
Mr. Martin, please.
The subcomplex was a separate bid. Schulberg was the contractor on that. The building is occupied. It's completely occupied now. That project was about $3.1 million on the initial bid, and it finished up right at $3.2 million. When we suggested early on to move the supervisor and some other facilities out there, we looked at the issue and we told the board that we had hoped to build that facility out there for hopefully $100 a square foot. It came in slightly more than that. It's a 30,000 square foot facility. So it came in at just slightly over $100 a square foot. And yes, it did come in later than we anticipated, but it's completed. The existing facility, the substantial completion contractual date is January the 21st. I suspect we are going to be later than that. I can't give you a number. It's not going to be substantially later, but we're not going to come in right at January the 21st. But we're nowhere near any consideration that building could cost $80 million. The contract value that we have on that facility with Turner is $33 million. I don't anticipate that we should, with all 3 buildings, that we will come in any more than what Mr. Barrett has referenced to at the 54 for the admin buildings, the standalone EOC, and the subcomplex area.
I'd just like to make one comment. I don't know how many people out here build a home. But if you build a custom-built home, it's rare that it comes in the date that you're promised it, because changes do occur. You see things differently. And if you're not buying a cookie-cutter home where you pre-buy it and when you're involved, they do come in late. And it's more important, I think, than meeting a particular schedule that's set a year or 2 out. It's more important to make sure that you do things right and that it's done properly and it's built to the best of the ability, even if it means it takes a little longer time to do it. And I think that applies to everybody's individual homes. With that, we'll move. We have a motion on the floor. No, sir. We have a motion on the floor. Would you have no more discussion on?
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
For the record, I just would like to have a at least monthly update on when we're to move, be complete and move, and if there's any unusual problems that come along, we need to be notified of that, because we don't need to be moving too much after January, the due date.
We said all along that we plan to move in May or June of 2007.
May.
Yes, and we will keep you up to date on that. We plan to have it complete before then, but 60 days to get into the building.
Push to do that.
Okay.
And the other thing is that we do need to look about the space for the constitutional officer and the sheriff in a timely manner and get back with that.
Yeah, and the point is where we was today that we're going to address it, but we do not want to push the building back, so we may move in and then do the change.
But we do need to stay on top of the needs of the other people.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Pardon? Okay. The next item is under Public Works 11I, and that's County Road 512, Phase 3, County Road 510, project number 9611 and 001, bid number 2006065, change order number 6, memorandum dated November 28, 2006, found on pages 387 and 394.
So we'll talk to this.
Good morning, Jim Davis, Public Works Director. This is a change order to include some traffic signalization work in the County Road 512 project at the Sebastian High School. Those signals were done many years ago, and all the signal work basically will change with the new extension of 89th Street east of County Road 510. So this change order just incorporates that signal work.
Okay. Any questions of staff?
Just one question. They also in here is $11,000 plus for plugging a well. Is that the current going rate for that kind of work, or?
It was a 680-foot deep artesian well, and usually it depends on how many bags of grout you use to seal the well completely. And there is some markup that was included by the construction manager for that. But I believe the actual plugging of the well and the grouting of it was a little over $9,000, and then the contractor adds his overhead and supervision.
Don't we have a process in place for capping wells, and at the county level, going through the I know something we talked about in the Ag Advisory Committee. If it's a well that we're responsible for, we ought to go ahead and utilize some of those funds if we can.
St. John's has a program that
we match it. We throw some dollars to it also.
Yes, we're trying to cap so many wells. We're trying to work with the private sector on that and use that money there on some of the wells that are just flowing out there. This is one affiliated with a construction project, so we kept it there. There's a lot of wells that need to be plugged that are leaking and things like that, and we are working with St. John's with that program and using that funding.
Good.
Okay.
Get a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Item 11I2, Florida Department of Transportation and Maintenance Memorandum of Agreement for US 1 Oslo Road to the South Relief Canal for landscape maintenance memorandum dated November 20th, 2006, found on pages 395 through 448.
The DOT is planning to widen US 1 in the southern part of the county from Oslo Road to the South Relief Canal, very similar to the project they've just completed between the South Relief Canal and north of 6th Avenue. The DOT is willing to landscape the corridor as long as the county commits to maintaining and replacing any landscaping that's damaged. So we've entered into similar agreements on North US 1, almost all the DOT projects recently to landscape the corridors. This is about 1.6 miles, and DOT plans to spend about $394,000 in landscaping and irrigation. The county's cost to maintain that historically has been about $30,000 a mile. And staff would recommend that you approve the MOA as you have on previous projects.
Any questions of staff?
Would like to ask that you don't put cactus plants there. You can't weed. They did that. DOT did on the bridge. You can't weed, and it's a mess. And that they really look to the plants and the trees they put there, that they're not only beautiful, but well maintainable.
We do have the plant palette that they use, and I didn't see any cactus on there. You said they use cactus where?
On the bridge.
On the Merrill Barber Bridge?
Yes.
I think that was a local garden club that did that.
No, it's not. It's DOT. They did Indian River Boulevard.
Okay.
And there was no cactus by the garden club.
All right. I didn't.
No.
It's in the city. I didn't manage that.
Right.
Can we get a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Next is 11J, Utilities. Consulting Service Work Order Number 4, amendment to Kimberly Horn permitting design and construction service replacement, services for replacement of the Wabasso Causeway Water and Sewer Main memorandum dated November 4, 2006, found on pages 449, 452, 454.
For the record, Eric Olson, Director of Utilities. This project is a little bit of a modification. The Wabasso Causeway currently has a force main that runs underneath. It's actually attached to the bridge itself. It's an old force main. Unfortunately, in years past, there's actually been some repairs needed on that force main. The concern that we've got is really multifold. Any construction on the bridge itself will cause us to move it, but more importantly, if this fails, if that force main ever fails, it'll inevitably it'll be a problem, mainly because of the fact that we'll probably not hear about it till the following day when some fisherman comes underneath the bridge and we hear about it that way. The repair itself is extremely difficult. You can just envision trying to fix the pipe under the bridge. So we've made original plans to basically directional bore underneath the lagoon, underneath the spans. But with changes in the DOT modification to the bridge, that we don't have to take everything out on this thing, we're going to maintain the two existing water main and force mains that we're replacing as water mains and force mains. We're going to convert them to a reuse main for the Sea Oaks A1A area there along that side. And in the process, now we need to free up the land links between the bridge spans. So what this is doing is allowing us to basically go back in and utilize the land links so that we can take away 100% of using the water and force main and convert them to a reuse main. That's kind of a confusing process, I know, but the long and short of it is that basically today we're now asking to basically use the links between the spans, so you'll have one reuse main, one force main. The force main and the water main will be directionally bored, and the reuse main will be on the bridge.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? If not, can we get a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Under County Attorney's Matters, 12A, Waterway Village DRI vesting memorandum dated November 28, 2006, found on pages 455 through 469.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For some time, there's been an issue as to whether the development of regional impact known as Waterway Village was vested for purposes of concurrency. And by way of background, the Community Development Department requested an opinion of our office in December of 2005 as to whether additional concurrency testing would be required as sequential phases of the approved DRI were submitted. And on behalf of our staff, both Mr. Dubrall and I issued separate but consistent opinions in late December that further concurrency review is not required. On January 12th of this year, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved a preliminary plan for Phase 2 of Waterway Village, but they made a second motion that no further phase be approved until the board obtained an independent legal opinion as to whether DRIs were vested at the time their final development order was approved, or whether further concurrency testing was required at each subsequent phase of the development. And I believe that was a suggestion that Mr. Baird made to the P&Z at that time. On January 16th, the board authorized Mr. John Shubin of the firm of Shubin & Bass to offer an independent legal opinion on this issue. And their opinion was that the prior approval of the DRI did not exempt the project from subsequent concurrency analysis in connection with application for preliminary plan developments approved for subsequent phases of the project. Mr. Shubin emphasized that this was a legal issue of first impression and that their opinion could be subject to legal challenge, and it should not be considered a guarantee that the county would prevail in the event DeVosto were to challenge actions taken in reliance on his opinion. Mr. Shubin continued to investigate the matter over the course of the summer, and in October confirmed his original opinion that subsequent concurrency testing should occur as additional phases were brought in. Now, our analysis is that under our concurrency management ordinance, there's language that says nothing contained herein shall limit or modify the rights of any person to complete any development that's been authorized as a development of regional impact pursuant to Chapter 380 Florida statutes. Further, the State Growth Management Act states, nothing in this act shall limit or modify the rights of a person to complete any development authorized as a development of regional impact pursuant to Chapter 380, or who has been issued a final local development order and the development has commenced and is continuing in good faith. Also, our opinion relies on rules of statutory construction set out in the case of Rinker versus City of North Miami, which states that statutes must be given their plain and obvious meaning, and it must be assumed that the legislature knew the meaning of those words. Secondly, statutes and ordinance should be given an interpretation that renders the ordinance valid and constitutional. And third, since zoning regulations are in derogation of private rights of ownership, words used in a zoning ordinance should be given their broadest meaning when there's no definition or clear intent to the contrary, and the ordinance should be interpreted in favor of the property owner. We also have opinions, declaratory opinions from the Department of Community Affairs that state that any development of regional impact final development order may provide for subsequent concurrency testing at subsequent phases of the development. This particular development order for Waterway Village had no such provisions for subsequent concurrency testing. What the development order did do was identify traffic transportation impacts caused by the DRI throughout its build-out, set out conditions that would mitigate those impacts, and those conditions required to mitigate the impacts have been entered into a developer's agreement, which DeVosto is currently going forward and carrying out. The current status of the project is that about half of the project has received preliminary plan approval, and 733 out of a maximum 1,596 units have already been vested on the county's concurrency management system. The Waterway Village DRI is imminent in submitting its next phase of development for approval, and our staff has been wrestling for some time with how to handle and advise other developers as to the availability of capacity, given there's been no decision on whether to load the Waterway Village trips onto our transportation system or not. It's my recommendation that you hear input from all interested parties, which would include Mr. Shubin, who the county's retained as an independent counsel to give advice on this matter, and also Mr. Barquette and Worsham, who represent DeVosto on this matter. The board's free to give whatever weight it feels appropriate to any of the opinions. It's still my recommendation that they be deemed vested for purposes of transportation concurrency. But having said that, all trips anticipated to be generated from Waterway Village should be loaded onto the current county's transportation model so that road capacity is not overstated to the absence of their future but vested trips. Now, the consequence of such a decision was analyzed by our traffic engineer, and I believed it was his finding that if we loaded the remaining waterway traffic onto the current system, that there would be two links that would fail. US 1 between 49th Street and 65th Street, as of October when the memo was generated, would go from 18 trips under capacity to 49 trips over capacity, and Kings Highway between 41st and 45th Street would go from 71 trips under capacity to 56 over capacity. However, Kings Highway is currently on the county's 5-year capital improvement plan and would be eligible for improvement through prop share contributions. US 1 isn't in the county or state capital improvement plan, so prop share is not currently available for that link. However, we have had some discussions about developers agreements where developers would work to improve that US 1 link. They're preliminary at this stage. So that's my opinion, which hasn't changed in the past year, that Waterway Village is vested and their trip should be loaded, but I would like you to hear from the other people with other opinions on this matter.
Mr. Shubin, would you like to come forward?
Good morning. My name is John Shubin of Shubin and Bass in the city of Miami, and I've had the pleasure of representing the county over the last year with respect to this issue. Our opinion has not changed, and what I would prefer to do is simply restate my opinion for the record, listen to the presentation that is made by DeVosta's counsel and interested parties, and be available to answer any questions. But as I've set forth in my correspondence, after looking at this issue on a number of times over an extended period of time, I don't believe, it's our firm's opinion, that the mere existence and approval of this application as a development of regional impact does not exempt subsequent applications for development orders from the requirements of your concurrency management system. The basis for that is that the Growth Management Act can't be read in a vacuum. And one of the most fundamental aspects of the Growth Management Act is that all development orders need to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. As I understand it, and again, I was not charged with doing a detailed fact inquiry, and in fact, in my correspondence, I said that there may be certain facts which wind up changing or altering my opinion, but I've heard none to date. My understanding is at the time of the initial approval of the DRI, and I will stand corrected, there was no reservation of concurrency for this project. There was no reservation of all of the trips onto the network. At the time of the Planning and Zoning Board hearing, my understanding from the record is that there was no concurrency certificate in place. These are some of the most fundamental aspects of concurrency management and growth management, meaning that applications for development orders at the time that they are to be approved need to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. And based on the findings in the record, that at the time that the application was made, there was no consistency. Again, it's our opinion that the mere initial approval of this application as a development of regional impact under the facts and circumstances as I understand them, does not provide the applicant with a blanket exemption. They could have reserved their capacity. They could have paid their impact fees up front and reserved their concurrency. They could have entered into a more formal development agreement as opposed to the informal development agreement that was entered into. And I don't believe that there is anything in state law that prohibits the action that I have recommended you have the discretion to take, which is to determine that it is not vested. But as your county attorney is absolutely accurate, there are no cases right on point that say yes or no. This is a very, very close call, but it's my professional opinion that you would have the discretion to take either action, but the discretion, in my opinion, you do have the discretion to determine that they are not vested by virtue of their approval as a development of regional impact.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman. Any questions of Mr. Schuman for you? Okay. Mr. Barquette, did you want to respond? I'm sorry.
I'm Lee Worsham with Rudin McCluskey representing DeVosta Waterway Village. I'm really happy to be up here finally after working with this issue and working with the staff for quite a while. Glad it's come up to a head because I think there's been an effort to kind of confuse and maybe obfuscate something that I believe is very simple. And first, I want to commend the board because I think you're sensitive to contracts, sensitive to breaches of contracts, issues like that. I think that's really what this boils down to after all the dust settles. I want to also commend your staff in handling this issue for this DRI, the concurrency issue. I think developments of regional impact are a little bit different than every other run-of-the-mill project, and they're handled differently under Florida law. But I want to just go ahead and try to deconfuse a little bit, because I think even outside counsel has said that he hasn't been made aware of facts that would lead to an opposite conclusion. And I think at this point you do need to look at your facts. You do need to look at facts. You need to look at your ordinances, because I do appreciate also what your ordinances say about how developments of regional impact can be handled for concurrency. DRIs are different. The Director of Public Works has an option in this case to look at concurrency both from a DRI perspective and from the local government, the county's perspective, all at once as part of a single study. That option was taken. That option was done. That's what happened. Basically, the conditions that were required to take care of this project's impacts from a road standpoint, from a transportation standpoint, those conditions were analyzed, established up front, put in the development order that was issued by this county in November of 2004. The development agreement embodies those conditions, shows what needs to be done to comply with the road requirements, transportation requirements, to meet concurrency through build-out of this project. And as long as my client is complying with that agreement, and as long as the county continues to live up to its side of that agreement, then we don't have a breach. And so I think we need to look a little bit at what the facts are, what your law is, what your ordinances say. Concurrency basically is essentially a process so that the local government can ensure that public services and facilities are available when they're needed, when the project requires those facilities to be in place, when the impacts of that project are being put on your system. You have a level of service, you set levels of service for facilities, including roads. This is done through your capital improvements element in your comprehensive plan. Basically, you can't issue, under your own ordinances, a development order unless these facilities are available concurrent with the impacts of the project. Now, DRIs, the DRI law, Development of Regional Impact, that was adopted in 1972. The concurrency in 1985. But it's all the same thing. Developments of regional impact are required to mitigate the impacts that those bigger projects cause on all public facilities and services. And a local government, when it approves a DRI, can't issue a development order for a DRI unless it takes care of the facilities. Now, the local government can either do those facilities, improve those roads, provide those services, or the developer can do that. In this case, the developer did that. Your ordinances have a provision that allow a developer to, in connection with your staff, determine and study what facilities are needed for that DRI, and the developer can provide those. That's what this project did. Now, what you're really talking about is which way does this project or did this project have to comply with currency? I think outside counsel is saying that Chapter 910, where you have to come in from time to time, every time you seek a preliminary plat approval to get a concurrency certificate, that's one way. But for DRIs, and DRIs only have the option to come in under Chapter 952, 075E, and I'll read it real quickly. For developments of regional impact, the analysis required by Indian River County for the purposes of determining concurrency and level of service compliance may be, at the Director of Public Works option, the same as the transportation methodology agreed on for preparing the application for development approval required by Chapter 380. That was the proposed procedure that was agreed to by the county. It was agreed to by Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. That's the study that was done that resulted in the conditions that were set out in the development order. Implementation of those conditions in the development order was what this board entered into late last year in the developer's agreement. And this is mentioned in Mr. Collins' memo. My client is in compliance with the provisions of this developer's agreement, and as long as we're in compliance with the provisions of this developer's agreement through build-out, we've met concurrency. Remember, there's two ways to meet concurrency, either Chapter 910 or Chapter 952. 952 in your ordinances was what was done, and because DRIs can do that, that's the option that was elected here, and those conditions were embodied into the development order and into the DRI agreement. So the reason that I said I appreciate you and your sensitivity to contract breaches is because this is a contract that was entered into between the county and DeVosta and Waterway Village, and we're in compliance with the conditions of that agreement. And I believe that if the county comes and says you're not vested, I believe that's a breach of the contract. I don't like the word vesting. Vesting here suggests that there's a law that something's been changed, and you know, we entered into it beforehand. But I think vesting here, I'd rather look at a different way. Here, I think it's just a matter of whether DeVosta has complied with the county's requirements for concurrency. And there's two ways to do it. Other projects that are not DRIs don't have the option to do it one time. The only way a project that's a DRI can get a handle on what the ultimate costs of development are going to be through build-out. You know, this is an 8-year project. The only way a developer can get a handle on what those costs are going to be is to do a DRI, because only through the DRI can you set the ultimate facilities, the ultimate costs of the road work that needs to be done, the utilities, every other support facility or concurrency facility for that project. That's the only way that it can be done. That's why DeVosta did it here, and I do appreciate that your ordinances allow that to be done. It's not a question of whether we're vested from having to comply with concurrency. The question is, did we comply with concurrency pursuant to your ordinances? And the answer is absolutely. And a negative vote here means that the county has elected to breach the developer's agreement it entered into last year with my client, and that's the way we would approach it. I don't think it's a question of vesting or not vesting. I think it's just a question of ongoing compliance with an existing contract, and nobody's in breach up until now. And that's the way we would prefer to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of anyone? Also, I might add that this isn't a public hearing, but if there are people in the audience that wish to be heard on this matter, they're welcome.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Just would like to, Mr. Shubin, if you would, is there anything, you don't even have to come up to, is there anything that has changed your mind after hearing what you just heard?
Nothing has changed my mind, but I might direct a question to staff, because the argument appears to be that it's an either or. You can either comply with Chapter 910 or you can comply with Chapter, I believe, 952, which is the alternate methodology system. I guess the question that I would have is, does 952 provide an alternate way of determining methodologies as opposed to determining the requirements of consistency? The basic position that I have is that even if you have a contract with an individual, and I've cited to the county attorney the case of Morgren versus Orange County, 818 Southern 2nd, 640. The issue is, are the provisions in the contract consistent with public policy so that they can be enforceable? And to me, there's nothing more fundamental than the public policy of the state of Florida that all development orders need to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. So to the extent that there is a contract that is being advocated, or provisions in a contract that are being advocated for the purposes of deviating from concurrency, those provisions are probably not enforceable. But the basic question is, was the application at the time concurrent or not? Not were there alternative methodologies that were employed to determine the conditions of the development order, because remember, a development of regional impact has a jurisdictional basis to look at regional impacts. It doesn't always look at local impacts and impacts on local road networks.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
And I'm not feeling well enough to to make a decision. But let me ask you, so what you're asking is, was there enough concurrency in place at the time whenever they got approval for the DRI? Is that what you just...
No, what I'm saying is, at the time that they came forward before the Planning and Zoning Board for their plan approval, were they concurrent or were they not concurrent?
Now, can I ask you the question, were they concurrent with the improvements that they were supposed to make, or were they concurrent without the improvements, or is that irrelevant?
My argument would be, were they concurrent with the applicable county ordinances? Because if the provisions of the contract conflicted with the applicable county ordinances, that's something that needs to be identified.
Would that be a question then, instead of being of staff, that should be a question of our attorney?
Well, I guess the issue is, and I can go through the memos and read them to you. There was a memo, I believe, in late December, either between Mr. Bowling and Mr. Collins, where it was or maybe January, where it was the understanding that at the time that the application was present before the Planning and Zoning Board, there were no concurrency certificates in place as required by the code. That was one of the issues. And so the question was, in the absence of those concurrency certificates, which would be required of any other developer, is there something special about this application, in as much as it's a development regional impact, that means that it should be treated differently? Now, Mr. Worsham has said, and again, this is not a law argument, I'm just trying to put on the table as many facts, as many questions as might be relevant to your decision. Mr. Worsham has said that you don't have to look to 910 because there is this alternative section, I believe section 952. My question is very simple. Whether it's 910 or 952, you have to be concurrent at the time that you have an application for a development order. For example, I don't believe that you could legally contract with another party to exempt them from concurrency unless there was some statutory basis for that exemption. So that's the question.
Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Shipman, who would you ask that question to so I can get an answer?
Your community development staff or your county administrator, whoever feels best qualified. But I think the record reflected that at the time of the application before the Planning and Zoning Board, a determination was made that concurrency was not met.
Mr. Keating? I wish I felt it.
Stan and I will try to tag team this answer, and let me take a look at the LDR's 952, but I think Mr. Shubin is correct that section 952 references methodology when they referred to the DRI methodology being allowable to be used for concurrency purposes. But let me again look at the specifics of the 952 section.
And we're almost looking for something that says this methodology is the equivalent of a certificate.
Right, and I think the 952 references a methodology and an evaluation. And in terms of when the development order was presented to the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning and Zoning Commission before that, as you all know, we have two different types of concurrency under Chapter 910, conditional, which is a snapshot in time, and an initial, which involves vesting. So 910 does make a distinction between an evaluation and a snapshot in time, conditional concurrency, and a finding on that and vesting itself. And through the DRI process, I believe that the traffic analysis for the DRI for all the units was evaluated by traffic engineering, and with the development order conditions that included transportation conditions, and at that time it was treated like a conditional concurrency. In other words, there was an evaluation and for transportation as well as other impacts, and so the development order does address anticipated impacts. That's why there are conditions in the development order as far as that development order goes.
But I want to make sure I understand this. You said it would be conditional on reaching a point where the impact would be vested. In other words, you're looking at a snapshot in time at that particular point. In other words, you're saying, yeah, at this particular time it looks well, but there's no vesting because nothing's been paid in the future. Is that my understanding is correct?
In other words, I mean, it's an excellent question because it gets right to the very point, and that actually is the issue. What's the difference between an evaluation and a vesting?
And a certificate.
Right, and that's the issue. I think the development order looks at anticipated impacts. There's all that analysis that goes in with the DRI, and the conditions are meant to mitigate the impacts. That's clearly what happens.
Would I be jumping to conclusions if I said that an evaluation is a determination of what is required? A certification or certificate is the completion of the process to acquire what is required.
Well, we actually have a certificate that is for conditional concurrency, even though it doesn't vest, and we have the certificate for initial concurrency. But it's the question of vesting on the concurrency management system or not. That's.
Bob, I say, pull your red pen out. Did you find something worthy?
Yeah, I did look at section 95207 5E, the section that was referenced, and it does appear to say that the county can use the methodology that's determined by the Regional Planning Council, the Department of Transportation, the applicant, and the county at a methodology meeting with respect to the DRI traffic analysis, and use that in lieu of the specific traffic analysis requirements that we have in here. It doesn't say anything about vesting concurrency. It's just a section that says an alternative methodology can be used. And I'd ask, Chris Moore may want to speak to this too.
Well, what I understand is it says that you can use this. It doesn't say that you must.
But you did. Oh, yeah, you did. Oh, yeah, you did. That's not in dispute.
Right. We can use an alternative methodology to determine the impacts, correct?
Okay.
But, and I guess my question is, at that point in time, though, we used a certain methodology to look at the current impacts, but did that guarantee them future impacts? Or again, is it just a conditional snapshot that at this point in time, the methodology says there's capacity, and now in the future, there may not be?
No.
I guess that's the issue that you need to determine. What I'm saying is this section doesn't seem to speak to that one way or another. It doesn't say anything about vesting. And as Stan said, for every project, we look at snapshot in time. Even a non-DRI conditional plan development project, we would make a concurrency determination at a point in time, but not necessarily vest them then.
Well, we even look at that on a rezoning.
Correct.
I mean, from agricultural R3,
exactly.
we look at that, the snapshot.
Right.
Okay, Chris?
Yes, Chris Moore, Assistant Public Works Director. The section that Bob is referring to in 95207 and that Attorney Worsham suggested is also, when we apply that, it's being applied to how the traffic study is prepared, not whether or not something is vested, not whether or not something meets concurrency. It's how the traffic study is prepared. And the reason that section is in there is that because development of regional impact is area-wide, it's not just our county, it's other counties, it's the state DOT. We have different levels of whether or not a project is significant at a particular intersection or on a given link. Our criteria is very stringent compared to other counties. So what we do is when we meet with Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and we do a methodology meeting for the DRI, we all get together and agree to certain terms and thresholds that will be used in the traffic study. But we do not speak to concurrency or vesting. We're just talking about how the traffic study is being prepared.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Bob, Mr. Keating, whenever we look at the snapshot for concurrency for a rezoning, help me understand the difference in that process versus the concurrency test for a DRI whenever it gets approval. I mean, one is, in effect, it's a PD getting rezoned,
Absolutely says that.
or it's PD that's getting zoning approval, and the other is a, whatever it is, but just a regular subdivision getting zoning approval.
Yeah, but you just said that.
Now, the subdivision that's getting zoning approval is not vested upon being zoned. Just because we take that snapshot and say that concurrency is available. Now, so if I'm not mistaken, what we're trying to do then is, if I can just take it in that same vein though, we're saying that this is a PD, it got rezoned, and in the snapshot it has concurrency, and now because it's a DRI, it automatically is vested concurrency.
No.
Second verse.
I think the difference is when we have a non-DRI project and we issue a conditional concurrency certificate, we're saying that the capacity to accommodate that rezoning or that project is there now, or will be there with a condition we might put on, like that they have to enter into a prop share. The difference with a DRI is they go through a pretty significant process, identify all the impacts, and then make commitments to make improvements in the future. And those commitments are incorporated into a development order that is approved by the county. That's where the difference is, and that's why it's more of a question in this case. And I don't know the answer whether they're vested or not, but that's, I think, the principal difference.
Okay.
Devasta had to build 53rd Street. That's one of their improvements. They have to make improvements to a number of intersections. They have to build 43rd Avenue between 49th and 50th.
Let me ask a hybrid, Mr. Chairman, if I could, of my question then. Instead of it being just a rezoning, let's take this as a planned development, where they have to make road improvements. And if they make road improvements in a planned development because we say so as they get their zoning approval, they're still not vested.
That's correct. Unless, before the pending ordinance, they could have opted to do that.
Right.
But yes, they would have had to pay all their impact fees. And any project to be vested, except for the DRI that we don't know about, and it's the issue today, any other project would have to pay all of its impact fees to be vested.
Mr. Barquette?
Thank you. Did you want to say something before I get started?
Just a couple of things, yeah.
If I could have it right after you get finished.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that.
Identify yourself again, please.
Lee Worsham.
Yes.
From where?
From Rudin McCluskey, representing Devasta from West Palm Beach.
West Palm Beach.
Right. I think we're sort of dancing around the issue here. I think the traffic study that was done was through build-out of this project. I don't know if I emphasized that enough before, but it was. In other words, the road improvements that were determined and prescribed by the staff and Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and agreed to by Devasta are what's the road work, what's the intersection work that needs to be done through build-out. This was a projection from 2004 to 2012. One thing about the DRI law that's a little bit different than the Growth Management Act, the DRI law says that money that's contributed and land that's donated and work that's done by a developer, development of regional impact, those facilities are reserved. They have to be reasonably attributable to the impacts of that project, but once the developer contributes that's reserved for that development. And I don't know if you want to use the word vested, but basically it's analogous, I think, to a sewer plant or a water plant. It's a one-time shot. You build the capacity for your facility, the water plant, you expand the water plant, expand the sewer plant. You don't have to do it again. When you put your impacts, when you put your water or your sewer, need your water or put your sewer impacts into that plant, it's there for you. The roads that we build, the intersection work that we do, it's there for Waterway Village, it's reserved for us, required to be reserved for us in Chapter 380. Now, in your agreement,
Good.
Surely.
Unless it's the same question. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so what you're saying is if you make an intersection improvement, that is, those trips should belong to you.
Yes, sir.
I agree with that. Okay, where I'm having the problem is there's capacity at an intersection right now, you want that also.
No.
What am I missing then?
We don't know.
I think what you may be missing is that there's...
They built the intersection, apparently, I would, probably somebody better than me could answer this, but they built the intersection for the capacity of build-out. but the problem is they are out at build-out now, and they want that capacity. I have one question, too. When you mentioned sewer, yeah, let me ask you one question, you respond to this, too. Water and sewer.
Yeah.
Are you vested there? Did you pay for your impacts up front for water and sewer?
When we do, that was just my example, because I think roads are analogous to water and sewer. Basically, the DRI law says if you have to pay for these things, if you have to pay money or donate land or build these facilities, they're available for the impacts of that project. You bought them and paid for them, and they can't be given away to somebody else. Your agreement, I just want to emphasize this, that's in your agreement, it says, except as described herein, and in the development order, the county shall not require developer to construct, contribute to, or share in the costs of any off-site improvements other than the payment of or credits toward applicable impact fees. This is the developer's agreement. Right. This is through build-out. And if this project has to come on in and get a certificate every time, what's going to happen is development that's been approved in the meanwhile is going to take that capacity, and we're going to stop. And since you can't require us to build any more roads or anything like that, somebody else is going to have to build them, or we're going to have to stop. But we are vested and approved through build-out, through our project's build. That's an agreement. And we've met the conditions in the development order, and we've met the conditions in the agreement. It goes to the integrity of your system, really. If you comply with your ordinances and build the facilities, they're for you.
Mr. Davis?
Yes. I need to go back to my question again. It's not 53rd Street that we have a broken link. It's on US 1. Now, you're saying because you made increases to capacity on some roads, you should have the option to get those.
No.
Y'all didn't do anything to US 1.
That's not what we're saying. That's not what we're saying.
All right, if we vest y'all, there's going to be some broken links on US 1.
But see, may I finally speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Leslie, here's the problem.
By the way, Bruce Barquette.
Yeah, Bruce Barquette, 756 Beachland Boulevard, representing the applicant. Been involved in the process from the beginning. Here's the situation, Leslie. Here's what hasn't been said. First of all, you're not here today to make a policy decision. You're here today to decide what was actually done, to either confirm or disconfirm what was done. So it's not a policy decision, because this contract's already been signed, this developer's agreement's already been issued. Now, what Mr. Shubin said was he hadn't been hired to do a detailed analysis of our particular project. What he did is an analysis of the law of DRIs. And in both of his pieces of correspondence to you, he said, it may very well be that DeVosta is vested. When we look at the particular facts of the case, that may be true. And in fact, his most recent letter to Will Collins, dated October 9th, says, upon further consideration, you have made me more comfortable with concluding that the legal conclusion you have reached, meaning Will, that the project is exempt from concurrency analysis based upon the law and the facts surrounding its original approval, is entirely defensible in court. Now, that's what Mr. Shubin said.
As is the other side.
Pardon me?
As is the other side of that argument.
Well, I understand that, but you're not making a policy decision. What you're trying to decide is what was already done. So let me tell you what was done, because I was involved in...
let me just mention your policy. I realize we're not making a policy decision.
Right.
But we're trying to make a decision based on what our policy is.
You're trying to make a decision based upon what was done, what the law of your county is.
Which is our policy.
No, policy and law are different.
Okay.
Please tell me you understand that. Here's what happened, and all due respect to Chris, when he said that the Chapter 952 doesn't address concurrency, let me read the ordinance that he was quoting from, because it absolutely clearly does. It says, for developments of regional impacts, the analysis required by Indian River County for the purposes of determining concurrency and level of service compliance may be, at the option of the Director of Public Works, the same methodology used for the DRI. So it absolutely addresses concurrency. The analysis required for the purposes of determining concurrency. So what we did, and DRIs are different, because they have a level of scrutiny by both the Regional Planning Council and as Chris said, a more intense level of scrutiny here. They said, look, if you're going to build this project, here is what you have to do to meet concurrency. You have to do 53rd Street. You have to do, I think there's like 14 off-site intersection improvements. You have to do through streets on 43rd Avenue. It's about a $10 or $12 million ticket. And if you do those, you have satisfied concurrency, because that is what's required to finish your project. That is what's required of you to meet concurrency, to make all of the intersections that you're going to impact work, to make all of the road segments that you're going to impact work, to make all of the through streets that you required us to do work. Okay. Then once you do that, your ordinance specifically says, and we had this discussion with Bob and Stan during the process, your ordinance specifically says, and this is chapter 910, nothing contained herein shall limit or modify the rights of any person to complete any development that has been authorized as a development of regional impact pursuant to chapter 380, Florida statutes. That's your ordinance. Nothing in your concurrency management ordinance can limit or modify the rights of any developer of a development of regional impact. Why? Because you said, before you do this project, you have to tell us every road, every intersection that you're going to improve, and then you have to enter into a developer's agreement to make those improvements, and we, on our side, will allow you to finish your project as presented if you do that. And that's what Lee is telling you. We've entered into this agreement. You guys have signed off on it. We've signed off on it. We've committed to those improvements. We're building 53rd Street. And so there's nothing in your ordinance that allows you to take that away from us.
I think that's what we're trying to determine. It says nothing in this act shall limit or modify the rights, and we're trying to determine what your rights were.
Well, it says the rights of any person to complete any development.
Well,
you don't stop.
Complete the development. Well, it depends on what your rights are and how they're interpreted. This is I guess it's been determined that a court there hasn't been a case on this specifically yet.
No, but what Will told you is the Department of Community Affairs. They've issued their opinion and said if the county plans to do concurrency analysis continuing through the project, they have to put it in the DRI, in the development order. And you didn't, because that wasn't the intent. The intent was, what do you need to do to maintain concurrency? Let's sign an agreement, and once you do that, you're done. And that's why, so far, you've already issued 2 concurrency certificates for about 733 homes. They're DRI concurrency certificates, and we have impact fee credits for others. But, I mean, what's being proposed is new and is different than the way the process worked.
Slight clarification. DCA doesn't say that you have to put it in if you want to do subsequent testing. They simply say there's nothing to prevent you from doing so.
Actually, that's what your memo says. I think the case is slightly different, Will. I think the case said that. Anyway.
Mr. Sherman.
Thank you.
Let me identify one point of significant difference. And Mr. Barquette is absolutely right. Throughout this process, I have said that I may be made aware of certain facts which change my conclusion. I've also said that if this commission were to determine that they were vested, that it would be legally defensible. As the chair accurately pointed out, either position would be legally defensible. But where I have been somewhat unequivocal and somewhat clear is that either under the Florida statutes, and let me just cite it for the record, 163-3167 sub 8, which is virtually identical to the provision that Mr. Barquette read in 910.03.5, I do not believe that those provisions in any way exempt the developer from concurrency requirements or vest their rights. And it's important, let me just read it. The local code provision, which mirrors the state statute, says that nothing contained herein shall limit or modify the rights of any person to complete any development that has been authorized as a development of regional impact pursuant to Chapter 380 Florida Statute, semicolon. Where Mr. Collins and I disagree is that my position is that when the legislature placed this into the Growth Management Act, and when you placed it into your first concurrency management system in 1990, relying on the Growth Management Act, the clear intent, not just looking at this language in isolation, but all of the language in the Growth Management Act, including requirements of concurrency for development orders, that what this meant was for developments of regional impact existing at the time of the creation of the comprehensive plan. Because what was happening in 1990 is you were moving into a new arena. You are now under the Growth Management Act, meeting your obligations under the Growth Management Act to enact a comprehensive plan and set forth appropriate concurrency management standards. So it's my position that the clear intent of this provision and the clear intent of the state statute was that it apply to developments of regional impact or development orders existing pre-1990 or 1985. The reason why I say that is, in the event that you were to have approval of a development order, let's say a phased development order, where the subsequent phases did not meet concurrency or did not vest under your ordinance, you could have a situation where somehow you would have a development order that was exempted from concurrency requirements that would apply to everyone else. And that, I do not believe, was the intent either of the Florida legislature or this board. There has been mention made, and I will stand corrected if I'm wrong, from your staff, that this was treated at the initial development order stage similar to conditional concurrency, meaning a finding was made that there was certain concurrency under certain situations that would be available. But if you read the provision 910.08, it makes it very clear that a finding of concurrency resulting from the review at this stage shall not be construed to guarantee the availability of adequate facilities at the time of the initial or final development order. Now ask yourself, is this fair under these circumstances? That may be a question that you do have to ask yourself. You might also ask yourself, though, whether or not the developer had the opportunity to vest themselves but chose not to. And in fact, in 910.08, it says at any time the applicant has the option to apply for an initial concurrency certificate and pay the applicable impact fees in order to reserve capacity. And that, as you know, is one of the issues that you're dealing with in your revisions, proposed revisions to 910. But under the section, under the version of 910 that was in place at the time of the development order, there were opportunities in place to vest. Now the developers are claiming that their contractual agreement with you served as a basis for substituting, served as an approval or some acknowledgement that somehow they vested. That's why I keep getting back to the fundamental question. You either meet concurrency or you don't meet concurrency. I don't believe a contract can agree, a contract entered by one commission can agree, unless certain very limited circumstances that are not, in my mind, present here, can waive a future planning and zoning board or a future commission's ability to exempt a developer from concurrency requirements. You have a system that determines when you're vested. You can look to that system. You're either vested or you're not vested. As to whether or not the issuance of a contract somehow exempts the developer from vesting, those sorts of issues deal with good faith reliance, what was said, what wasn't said. But typically, as we all know, developments of regional impact are big applications. These are very sophisticated developers. These are very sophisticated counsel on both sides. That would be something that a court would look to in taking into consideration the facts and circumstances surrounding this. Again, I'm not asking you to go either way. What I'm just saying is that, to me, the fundamental issue is, was there concurrency at the time of the application under your ordinance at the time? If the answer is no, is there some legal basis for exempting the developer from concurrency under those facts and circumstances?
Mr. Chairman, let me go ahead, Pete, then I've got a...
Okay, I just have a couple thoughts so far. I think this whole thing between the 910 and 952 is strictly the methodology. And one method, and a real simple example is we're going to count cars from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. The other methodology says we're going to count from 5 to 6. And we've just agreed on which methodology we're going to use to make those counts. And I don't think that guarantees concurrency. It just agrees how we're going to count traffic to determine methodology. I agree with Mr. Worsham that the improvements that DeVosta is going to put in are certainly reserved and guaranteed for your project. We're not looking to take away any of that. I think our issue is with the US 1 capacity. I think what Mr. Barquette said, you've come forward twice before, received certificates to do the first phases that you've completed because there was capacity available, and that now we've reached the point where your subsequent application, there is no capacity available on US 1. I don't think we're taking away anything on 53rd or 58th, any of the improvements in your condition. It's just we've reached a stopping point on US 1, and I think the 910, 952 just says how we're going to count that traffic. So that's kind of, I don't know, where I am on that.
We both have something to say. Can we?
Yeah, let me comment also on what Mr. Shubin said, and also from the get-go on this, just to probably oversimplify it, and you may disagree with my take on this, and if so, I'll listen to that. But basically, we're treating this DRI differently than we do other developments. That's a given.
That's correct.
They go through a lot more. That's a given. But the bottom line is and we are looking at setting a precedent where we go here as far as how we treat DRIs. And the difference is when another development comes in, they vest in a certain way, and they pay their impact fees, and they're required to. But then, because this is a DRI, we've been told that we don't have that option, that because you're a DRI, and that's the question, are you vested or are you not vested? And because you're a DRI rather than a regular PD. And that's the question we're trying to get to here.
Yeah, that's actually...
And let me just finish, because my position on this is that I want to try and treat everybody equally. And if a PD comes in and has to vest this way, then regardless of it being a DRI or not, they should vest the same way, and they should pay their impact fees up front and know that they're vested. Somebody else comes in that's just a PD and dumps $10 million in the ground, they aren't going to do it if they don't have the capacity. So they're going to buy those fees up front if they're able to, or pay those fees up front. And that's kind of a simplification, but that's the question. Are you or are you not vested? And quite frankly, I don't believe you are. That's my position. Anyway, go ahead, Bruce.
I sort of suspected that might be your position. But let me just tell you, what Mr. Worsham said was wrong, because what he said is that we're trying to become exempt from concurrency. That's not true. That's the whole point. It's not that we're exempt. It's that we've complied with concurrency. And what Mr. O'Brien said was a little bit troubling. We didn't apply for those concurrency certificates that we've already been issued. We got issued those as our applications for approval. We didn't apply for concurrency, didn't do a subsequent study. They were issued as DRI concurrency certificates. So what you said was not quite accurate. It wasn't that we had to do another analysis. They were issued because that was the understanding of us and the staff of what of our particular DRI did. Now, the final thing about what you just said, Mr. Wheeler, is you could be establishing a precedent, but let me just tell you, any other DRI that's going to come in is going to specifically address concurrency in the development order if they do it right. So that will be addressed up front. But what we did is, and this is, I can't overemphasize this, and this was with the agreement of staff, by the way, we said, okay, what improvements do we need to do to satisfy concurrency? What improvements do we need to do? Do we need to commit to satisfy concurrency? And then we signed a developers agreement to do those improvements. So, Mr. O'Brien, when you say US 1 is failing, that may be true. But the development agreement and the development order says, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do to us about that, because we didn't cause that failure. So what the developers agreement says is, these are the only roads that you have to improve, these are the only intersections that you have to improve, and these are the only monies that you have to pay. And if you do all that, you can complete your project. You don't have to improve any other roads, you don't have to pay any other monies, and you don't have to make any other intersection improvements. So what you're saying is, because US 1 is failing, now even though the developers agreement says you don't have to do anything else, we can say we can stop your project. See, so that doesn't work. There's a disconnect in logic there, Peter.
Well, I don't think we're asking you to do anything else. I think we're just saying that we can't go forward because there's no capacity.
And what's the difference? So that's like saying, I'm not saying you can't proceed down this road, but if you pay me money, I will let you proceed down this road. That's what you're saying.
Let me,
Don't let it go
let
your mouth.
me ask you a question, Bruce.
More analogy.
How many of your impact fees has this 1,596 homes paid for water and sewer?
How many of the impact fees paid for?
Yeah.
About 106, even though we're actually vested for 733.
And how were you vested for 733?
Under the concurrency certificates that were issued under the DRI.
So the only money you've paid for utilities right now
156.
is 103 or 156.
That's because that's the only building permits we've pulled so far.
But y'all built a sewer plant or something?
No.
Capacity?
But and I'm curious about that because the other developers who've come in have paid their impact fees up front for the entire development, like GL Homes, so on. So there's a difference here too.
None of them built a 4-lane road from Kings Highway to US 1. None of them have committed to the intersection improvements that we committed to.
Okay, well, I just wanted the question answered. Thank you.
I think there is a question about the timing of payment of impact fees, and the development order itself says that the impact fees need to be paid by DeVosta when they come in for an application for a building permit in normal time. Doesn't make them, as a condition of vesting, prepay those impact fees. It just says, here's when you can pay these impact fees.
Okay, I think if we got, I mean, we've beaten this thing pretty good, and I think, you want to bring it to a conclusion?
May I just add one more thing? When we went in for the traffic study, did the initial traffic study, US 1 didn't fail because of our traffic. If US 1 fails, it's been because of subsequent approvals. But when we got our approval and we did the analysis for concurrency, we didn't cause US 1 to fail. Our project is approved through build-out. You can't stop us because the only way that we could go on now, based on what you're saying, is that we'd have to do some more work, do some more road work, and you specified the road work that it takes for us to complete our project. So you can't stop us for US 1.
Well, and that's not, I mean, the question here today is, are you or are you not vested? And can you or can you not move forward? And as far as vesting goes. And that's the primary question, whether it be US 1 or whatever. And my position is, and this goes way back, I talked to Will months ago, I just don't believe that the state intended for the DRI to have that much latitude in dealing with local rules and regulations and how we want to govern our own county. And therefore, my feeling is you're not vested under our home rule. Okay, that's about it.
Thank you. I have to echo that, and I know that other projects are run-of-the-mill projects that you happen to mention, but DRIs, our staff has said they don't know if you're invested or not. And it's our discretion to decide. And
ultimately a judge.
Ultimately, yeah.
At this point, it is our discretion to decide. If they decide to go beyond our discretion, then it would be a judge.
Right.
Thank you. I'm trying to make this fair, and I do not believe that DRIs are exempt from concurrency, and I do not believe that concurrency was met.
Mr. Collins, in order for us to go ahead and take a position on this, how would you like the motion to be framed? I think that we're starting to lean towards the non-vesting side.
I think all you have to do is make a motion that you find that the final development order approval for Waterway Village did or did not vest them for purposes of concurrency.
Should we do this just for Waterway Villages?
I think just for this, because I can guarantee you going forward, the staff will address it in any development order, whether subsequent concurrency testing is required or not.
So moved.
Second.
And this
You want to
is
repeat the motion?
Yeah.
This is to find that they are not vested. This is
that is not vested.
And this is the motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
And Mr. Shubin, stay tuned.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did I miss something, Will?
No.
Okay. Okay. Next item, Mr. Davis, and I realize you have to leave, Wesley, so.
It's my item, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
You got time to put that on next week if you want to move it.
No, we'll go ahead and take care of this real quick. Mr. Chairman, we had a meeting with a group of individuals that you'll see if you turn to page 470 of your agenda. And it really, this is precipitated from the joint meeting of Brevard County. And in an effort to try to move forward with this, we had our state representative, Ralph Popple, there. And what we're proposing is to basically put a little bit of some infrastructure and some amenities at a site that is currently being used for sculling and practice and sculling competition. For this to go before our legislative delegation, it was asked that I bring this to this commission. Commissioner Colin's going to bring it to her commission, and as you see, it's one of our legislative priorities. And I won't beat this to death, but if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Other than that,
One question of Mr. Baird. The money we're getting from, and I'm assuming the money we're getting from the swap on the Barrier Island could be used for something like this also, but it's not in our county.
I don't know if you want to legally use that out of something outside of your county. I don't
But
think
just a question. I wanted, okay.
I wouldn't recommend you.
I wouldn't recommend it. I'm just asking.
I don't think you could.
I don't think you could.
and keep in mind the funding from this at this point is we're requesting it come from the St. John's Water Management District. It's on their property, and it would really be no different than any other facility. For example, the restrooms at Miami Lakes or Garcia's, the boat launch at the Stick Marsh.
Okay.
It's that kind of right.
Peter?
Mr. Chairman, I just move resolution of support for Commissioner Davis's request.
Second.
And you'll bring it back with more information if you have more?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I guess the only thing to add is it going to be known as the Wesley S. Davis National Sculling Center?
No. You can look at this physique. I didn't play basketball
Is
either in high
there
school.
naming rights in this resolution anywhere?
Well, I will have to tell you that in college at Florida Southern, we did have a winning sculling, and
Really?
they came by our sorority house at 4 in the morning, every morning.
Stroke.
Yeah. With the boat over
It
there.
really is kind of a hidden little gem up there. I think this is well deserved. I know the Sebastian Chamber's been talking about moving this forward for several years, so I think it's a great thing. So,
Okay. We're,
It'll be brief.
Joel Tyson, City of Fellsmere. Two things that was talked about. One is I had asked that if anything's done up there, that it be dedicated in the memory of Tom Adams, the former Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State. And the other thing is that Representative Popple had suggested that this be designated as a state park. And if it is, then it would make it a lot easier to fund it.
I don't think we'll be making that decision here.
No, but I just wanted to clarify that because they were talking about naming it and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir. Give us your name and address, please.
George Brzezinski, 1825 21st Avenue, Vero Beach. I'm just here as an individual, but as a scholar myself, I heartily endorse this proposal, this project, and I hope...
Hardly or heartily? Hardly or heartily?
Heartily. And I hope very much that the commission will approve it and do whatever they can to get this through the legislature. My only comment is that as it stands right now, it seems to be geared towards organized rowing groups, schools and colleges, and possibly rowing clubs. But I would like to suggest that there is a demand for individual rowers to have access to rowing facilities, and that since this is going to be funded by public monies, that should be taken into consideration to the extent that you have any control over it. In whatever development plans are issued.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next, Solid Waste Disposal District. Let's see, Wesley. Approval of minutes meeting October 10th, 2006.
Move approval.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. 5-0. Also, approval of bid of award, Indian River County, bid number 2006105, front-end wheel loader with trash handler, guard package, Utilities Department Solid Waste Disposal District memorandum dated November 17, 2006, found on pages 474 through 481.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries 5-0. Recycling services for schools, government facilities, memorandum dated September 20th, 2006, found on pages 482 to 484.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries 5-0. Florida Tire Recycling, Inc., FTR Waste Treatment Agreement, memorandum dated October 24, 2006, found on pages 485 through 491.
Move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Like sign. Motion carries. We're adjourned.